Chapter 1458. The moment Luo Fan stepped into the space-time passageway, a strong pulling force suddenly acted on his body and pulled him, trying to trap him in this world so that he could not escape. Luo Fan was shocked when he discovered this strong pulling force. Then, he quickly realized that this was because he had too many connections with this world. Whether it was the sins he had committed, the benefits he brought to this world to make up for the sins he had committed, or the merits he had obtained from the universe. Even the retribution fire of heaven and earth, which was burning his life instincts and the essence of his life, had changed his relationship with this world and made it unwilling to let him leave. After discovering this boundary, Luo Fan was even more determined to leave. With a thought, the heavenly cauldron of the divine court trembled slightly. As the holy will that was integrated into it vibrated, it produced an unimaginable force that directly resisted the invisible pulling force. Taking advantage of the moment when the force slowed down, he quickly rushed into the space-time passageway. He disappeared from this world. The space-time passageway was completely closed in an instant, as if it had never appeared. He was completely cut off from all connections with this world. After Luo Fan left, this world seemed to have a subtle vibration. However, it only lasted for a moment. Although this world was unwilling to let Luo Fan leave, he was after all only a cultivator, a false saint. Even though he was so powerful that he could be stronger than an ultimate venerable, but compared to this world, he was still so insignificant. This world could have such a subtle change because of his departure. To be able to have a slight vibration was actually giving him a lot of face. The place where Luo Fan appeared after leaving that world was not any world that he had been to before. It was a completely unfamiliar vast thousand worlds that even he did not know where it was. The entire vast thousand worlds were made up of flames. Endless flames formed everything in this world, including the land, the sea, the mountains, the rivers, and all kinds of living creatures. There was even a humanoid creature that was made up of flames. The flames had all kinds of colors. When these colors were mixed together, this world became rich and colorful, becoming almost no different from an ordinary world. Luo Fan scanned the world and saw all the secrets in it. After all, it was just a great thousand realms, and the creatures born within it were the most powerful. However, he was only a half-step pseudo-sage. Such a world was already considered extremely powerful among the many great thousand worlds, standing at the peak of the great thousand world. But compared to Luo Fan, his thoughts swept through. Everything in this world would be under his control. Even a half-step pseudo-sage was like an ant to him that he could easily squash. Therefore, he did not care about everything in this world. His heart moved. He arrived before the most powerful flame in this world. This flame was a type of flame called the world-extinguishing flame. In this world, it was the ultimate world-destroying demon king. It could be said that it was the home of this world. In the future, when this world was about to be destroyed, this flame would leave this place, completely isolated from the flames of the outside world, and spread out. It would directly ignite everything in this world. This included time, space, nomological laws, and even other flames. Then, it would burn crazily, turning everything into a part of this flame. In the end, even this flame would burn itself out, staying in this great thousand world, disappearing among the endless great thousand worlds in the universe. Everything in the world had a natural counter to each other. This world-extinguishing flame was so powerful and dangerous. However, since it could exist in this world, there were naturally things around it that countered it. At this very moment, what existed around this flame was a suppressive flame that was specifically designed to counter the world-extinguishing flame. It was a completely sealed flame. Although this suppressive flame could not be compared to the suppressive power of the divine court heavenly cauldron, its effect was still incredible. Under its suppression, the aura of the world-extinguishing flame could not leak out, let alone ignite everything in the outside world. What Luo Fan valued now was the isolation effect of this suppressive flame. After all, he was hiding from the Book Supreme and the others. This was not the same world. Here, the Book Supreme and the others did not need to analyze the nomological laws again. They could fully utilize their cultivation realm and the power of their supernatural powers. Thus, in this place, the power of their supernatural powers would not be restricted or weakened. If Luo Fan were to encounter them here, even though he was quite confident that he could defeat them and repel them. However, if that happened, wouldn't he be in big trouble like before? Wouldn't he continue to be chased by the Book Supreme and the others? Where would he have the time to complete his ultimate goal of entering this world? Thus, at this moment, what Luo Fan needed to do was to hide himself. The suppressive flame's power was exactly what he needed. Although it was impossible for this suppressive flame to completely cover all his information and traces of his existence, as long as it could cover most of it, it would be enough to buy him enough time. With a thought, he raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. In front of him, the world-extinguishing flame was like an ordinary flame as it gradually shrank. Not long after, it shrank into a pitch-black flame lotus and directly fell into his hand. Although this world-extinguishing flame was a world-destroying existence to the great thousand worlds, it was enough to cause the entire world to walk towards destruction. But to Luo Fan it was just a slightly special flame. With his ability, it was natural for him to need it as he pleased. What a wonderful flame! Luo Fan rotated the flame lotus in his hand, praising its strength in his heart. This world-extinguishing flame was quite mysterious. Countless strange laws had formed into a strange existence, forming an absolute power of destruction in the great thousand worlds. After tasting this world-extinguishing flame for a while, Luo Fan casually threw it aside. This suppressive flame existed because of the existence of the world-extinguishing flame. If Luo Fan put away the world-extinguishing flame, this suppressive flame would naturally dissipate. Unless Luo Fan used his own strength to maintain this suppressive flame. However, since there was an easier method, he only needed to leave the world-extinguishing flame here. All he needed to do was to leave the world-devastation fire here. Why would he waste his energy to use his own power to support the suppression fire? The original size of this world-extinguishing flame was tens of thousands of feet. Now that it had been compressed into a small lotus flower by Luo Fan, a spherical space with a circumference of hundreds of thousands of meters was revealed. Such a large size. It might not be enough to do other big things, but it was more than enough to open up a cave mansion to live in. Luo Fan casually waved his hand and countless materials appeared out of thin air to build a cave mansion in front of him. This cave mansion was actually a world. This was actually a common practice for all cultivators who had the ability to open up a world at will. If they could open up a world at will, who would have the patience to build a small house to live in? After entering their own world, they could control everything and change everything at will. They could create whatever cultivation environment they wanted, and they could experiment with whatever cultivation ideas they wanted. This was such a wonderful thing. In contrast, in other people's worlds, no matter how luxurious and wonderful the buildings were, they couldn't compare to this. However, after all, Luo Fan was hiding from the Book Supreme and the others. Therefore, this world wasn't as self-contained as the world he had originally opened up at will. It didn't exist independently of the world it was in. Instead, it integrated with this world in a very strange and wonderful way, making the two become a complete whole to a certain extent. There was no difference between them. In this way, no matter how the Book Supreme and the others searched, they couldn't find the real existence of this world. They couldn't use the world search method to find Luo Fan's location. If this wasn't the case, if Luo Fan opened up an independent world casually like before, that world would actually be equivalent to another vast thousand world. Even if it appeared to be in this vast thousand world, its essence would already be equivalent to this vast thousand world. At that time, all the arrangements he had made in the great thousand world would be for naught, unless he had made the same arrangements in his own world. Otherwise, he would not be able to do so. Otherwise, the Book Supreme and the others could directly bypass this world of flames and trace back to the independent vast thousand world that Luo Fan had opened up to find Luo Fan. Based on this consideration, Luo Fan chose to do this at this moment. After this world and this world of flames merged, it seemed that the space inside the cave mansion had been expanded to infinity. No matter what angle one looked at it from, it was simply impossible to find the difference between these two completely different worlds. This cave mansion looked like a small, simple, and unadorned stone house. Luo Fan lifted his foot and stepped into it, directly appearing on a vast and boundless platform, surrounded by the boundless starry sky of the universe. This kind of cave mansion structure was his habit. After sitting down, Luo Fan let out a long breath. With a thought, his life source directly appeared in front of him and appeared outside his body. The life source was originally the deepest core of a person's life. It existed in the deepest part of the spirit and had reached the point where the essence of life could no longer be penetrated. If an ordinary person touched such an existence, not to mention moving it out of his body, it could cause irreparable damage. In the end, he could even directly lose his life and enter the cycle of reincarnation. However, it was obvious that this criterion, which was absolutely correct for the average person, was not correct for Luo Fan. From Luo Fan's point of view, this life source was only a part of him. It was not much different from his limbs. Naturally, it was a simple matter to move it out of his body. This life source looked indistinct and clear. It directly emitted a trace of eternal and indestructible aura. It felt extremely similar to the aura emitted by the Holy Decree. This was the aura that belonged to Luo Fan's Holy Decree, yet it wasn't. The entire life source squirmed slightly in front of Luo Fan. Every change on it seemed to contain all the mysteries of the universe and the infinite mysteries of the Great Tao. In a trance, even all of Luo Fan's cultivation achievements could be found in it. The use of the law of cause and effect, the Great Tao of the Way, and so on. The world view, and so on and so forth. Everything existed. This was the life source. This was the life source. It was an existence that contained everything of any living creature. As long as the life source existed, any living creature could return in one piece without any losses, even if its body and spirit were destroyed. But if his life source was damaged, then no matter how intact he looked, he would definitely suffer irrecoverable damage, and in the end, he would never be able to recover from it. At this moment, on top of Luo Fan's life source, there was a small, insignificant, but incomparably tenacious flame. It looked as if it was real and tangible. This flame was the color of glass. It looked extremely illusory and beautiful, but it also gave off an indescribable sense of danger. This was the world karmic fire. It was also the fire that Luo Fan had previously come into contact with. It was the fire that the figure formed from the saint's aura had unleashed at the last moment. It was the most stubborn of all the world karmic fire that he had created for the world. It was the most tenacious and the most dangerous. This bit of world karmic fire was currently burning Luo Fan's life source. It was trying its best to turn his life source into its own fuel, wanting to drag Luo Fan into the abyss of destruction. Fortunately, Luo Fan's life source was tough and unbreakable. Although it was being burned by the world karmic fire, it was only bringing him pain. However, there was no real damage to his body. However, this was only temporary. If the world karmic fire continued to burn, his entire life source would be ignited and completely turned into material for the world karmic fire. That was for sure. Looking at the world karmic fire, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. He raised his hand and reached for the world karmic fire. With a gentle pinch, he had already pinched the world karmic fire between his fingers. However, when he exerted force, he discovered that the world karmic fire that he could clearly come into contact with was like an illusion. He couldn't pinch it at all, let alone grab it. As expected, it's not that simple. Luo Fan sighed and stopped this pointless experiment. If the world karmic fire could really be extracted so easily, he wouldn't have needed to work so hard to bring benefits to that world to offset the world karmic fire. Wouldn't it be fine if he could just use some methods to extract the world karmic fire? However, after sighing, Luo Fan smiled for some reason. Compared to the situation where he couldn't come into contact with the world karmic fire at all in that world, it was a significant improvement for him now that he could come into contact with the world karmic fire. If he continued in this direction, he might be able to extract the world karmic fire. This was a normal change. After all, the world karmic fire was the world karmic fire of that world. As long as he left that world, the world karmic fire would lose the support of that world, and its power would naturally not be as strong as it was in that world. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind, and Luo Fan began to rack his brain. With the help of the various senses and changes he had experienced when he came into contact with the heaven and earth karmic fire, he searched and created a method to capture the heaven and earth karmic fire. For Luo Fan, this was a process that he could not be more familiar with. However, this didn't mean that it was easy to accomplish. It was his first time coming into contact with the world karmic fire. Although the world karmic fire he had come into contact with in the past was also born from the world, its power was like comparing an ant to a dragon. The two could not be considered the same thing. The method to use the world karmic fire and the method to extract it. Clearly, it could not be used on the world karmic fire. Luo Fan pondered. Countless magical abilities and innumerable secret arts continuously appeared in his mind, and were continuously rejected by him. Several days passed like this. Luo Fan sighed in the end, and took out the World Merit Seal that he had obtained from the universe in his sleeve. The World Merit Seal's power was greatly reduced after leaving that world, and it seemed to have been reduced much more than the power of the world karmic fire. At the moment, the World Merit Seal seemed to have dimmed a little. The world karmic fire corresponds to the world merit. In particular, the laws of that world are special, and the Great Path is special. The best way to find a way to deal with the world karmic fire is to start with the world merit. With that thought, Luo Fan began to insert his mind into the World Merit Seal. As he inserted his mind into it, the world merit in the World Merit Seal slowly flowed through his mind. The merit of the world in the Merit Seal slowly flowed through his heart. The world merit was a reward given by the world to those who were beneficial to the world. It itself did not represent pure power. It was a form of authority. It was a form of authority in that world. Those who possessed the world merit could often obtain unexpected benefits because their authority in that world was different from other living beings. They could enter places that others could not enter at will. They could safely pass through places that others would definitely die, and they could obtain great benefits from places that others would definitely encounter misfortune, which made them seem extremely lucky. This was the essence of the world merit. If someone could collect an immeasurable amount of world merit, their authority would be raised to an unbelievable level. Then, his authority would be raised to an unimaginable level, and he would be able to obtain all the mysteries of that world, and finally become a sage. At the very least, they would be able to become a sage in places that were full of world merit. Becoming a sage, this was also the principle of becoming a saint through virtue. Of course, this was an extremely crude and simple description that was only a step away from being wrong. The real process of becoming a saint through virtue was, of course, countless times more complicated, exquisite, and profound than this. But it was not something that the current Luo Fan could understand, so there was no need to talk about him. After carefully comprehending the essence of the world merit, Luo Fan gradually understood some things. The world merit was a form of authority, so the world karmic fire that corresponded to it could only be a similar existence. Perhaps it was relative, or perhaps it was the same existence, just that it had a different expression. After understanding this, Luo Fan suddenly became enlightened. The method to capture the world karmic fire that he could not figure out before suddenly emerged naturally, and the method was extremely detailed, almost without any errors. There was no need for any changes. After coming out, he could naturally use it and cultivate. Under this wonderful feeling, a faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. He reached out and gently pinched the tiny world karmic fire. Then, his fingers did not exert force but changed slightly. It directly turned into a glazed color, and the aura it emitted became almost the same as the world karmic fire. After his palm changed in such a way, he didn't even need to exert any force or use any means to pull it. The glossy heaven and earth hellfire automatically detached itself from Luo Fan's life source and fell directly into his palm. It floated and rotated silently 3 inches away from his palm. Sensing this change, Luo Fan hurriedly withdrew his hand. At the same time, his life origin directly drilled into his head, sank into the depths of his sea of consciousness, and re-drilled into the depths of his spirit, returning to its original position. The moment his life origin returned, an indescribable feeling of comfort welled up in his heart. This feeling of comfort was a feeling of complete security and absolute stability. At this moment, Luo Fan finally believed that he had completely eliminated the influence of the world karmic fire on him. He could not help but smile faintly. With a thought, he raised his hand and clapped. The speck of karmic fire in his hand instantly turned into a glazed seal. Judging from its size, it was thousands of times larger than the original karmic fire, and it was about the same size as the karmic fire at the side. Luo Fan did not control the shape of the seal. However, it naturally evolved into a shape similar to the World Merit Seal, displaying the same style. When the two were placed together, one would know at a glance that they were closely related. This was the World Karmic Fire Seal. Chapter 1459. A faint smile appeared on Li Hao's face as he looked at the 2 seals that appeared in front of him. The 2 seals were opposite to each other, and their effects and powers were completely opposite. However, they complemented each other by comprehending each other's mysteries through the connection between them. It could allow the mysteries of the worldly merit and worldly karmic fire that were originally hidden in the thick fog to be revealed more easily. Moreover, more importantly, by doing so, he could completely eliminate all of his hidden dangers. It allowed him to relax at this moment, as he no longer needed to worry about the worldly karmic fire causing harm to him. After letting out a long breath, Li Hao put the 2 seals into his heaven and earth in his sleeve. Although it was a good time to comprehend the worldly merit and worldly karmic fire, there was something else that he needed to comprehend the most urgently. That was the saint's god power that he had obtained from Ningzun. In fact, ever since he had survived the heavenly punishment, his most pressing wish was to comprehend this saint's divine ability. If it wasn't for the fact that the karmic fire of heaven and earth had been constantly burning his life source and causing him harm at every moment, he would not have been able to do so. He might not even have bothered with the worldly karmic fire and directly comprehended the saint's god power. Now that he had completely eliminated the harm that the worldly karmic fire had caused him, he naturally wanted to comprehend the saint's god power as soon as possible. He rummaged through the saint's god power from the depths of his memory. In an instant, complicated and mysterious god power techniques flowed through his mind. This was not the first time he had seen this god power. In fact, he had already comprehended some of the mysteries of the first half of the god power and had a rough understanding of the underlying principles within. However, he only remembered the second half of the god power. This was because when he had obtained the second half of the god power, he had only managed to remember it because the situation had been too dangerous. As for the mysteries of the god power itself, he did not spend much time comprehending it. It could be said that at this moment, This was the first time he had truly comprehended the complete saint's God power. This God power. Its name was karma. It was a simple God power that described the mysteries of karma, and how to refine karma into something similar to a magic treasure. Of course, this was only superficial. If it was in the hands of a saint, of course, this was the only effect of this divine ability. However, in the hands of any cultivator who was not a sage, the true profundity of this magical power would be revealed. However, this was not the effect on the surface. Instead, it was the Tao that belonged to the sages. This kind of Tao was boundless. For non-saint level existences, no matter how deeply they comprehended it, no matter how long they spent comprehending it, they would definitely be able to obtain endless benefits. For cultivators who had yet to become a sage, the way of the sage was equivalent to an infinite number. Just like pi. If you simply wanted to use it to calculate 20, you could naturally use it as a whole. But if you wanted to be completely accurate with pi, no matter how many years you calculated, you would not be able to get a completely accurate result without any deviation. This was the same as the way of the sage compared to ordinary cultivators. Luo Fan looked at this saint's God power with a look of anticipation on his face. The profundity of this divine art was deep and unfathomable. The principles contained in it were endless. He didn't need to completely understand all the profundities of this divine art. As long as he could gain something from it, it would be a huge benefit to him. It could even allow his cultivation to improve tremendously. With a thought, this God power began to expand rapidly. The endless words that it had evolved into gradually began to change, and gradually began to form a strange whole. The entire God power was now complete and flawless. It was a self-contained cycle. Once it was activated by Luo Fan, the endless words would naturally evolve into a strange world. This world was extremely crude at first. It seemed to be a world made purely of karma. Even the heaven and earth were not very stable, let alone any living beings. But as Luo Fan delved deeper into this God power and expanded the mysteries contained within it, the world formed by this God power became more and more complete. The various laws within it also became more and more complex, and more complete. Very soon, endless things that were increasingly different from karma, including laws, time, space, matter, energy, and so on, quickly took form. Gradually, this world became rich and colorful, and it gradually became no different from the real world. It was to the extent that at a certain point in time, the natural circulation of the world even gave birth to countless types of living beings, causing this world that was completely developed by this divine ability to be full of vitality, causing this world to become no different from the real world. This world was so wonderful and incredible that Luo Fan could almost find the shadow of all worlds within it. An indescribable sense of familiarity lingered in his heart. And this complete world did not stop evolving. It continued to grow at a rapid pace, constantly strengthening and constantly perfecting itself. From a barely formed world, it gradually grew into a minor kiliacosm. From a minor kiliacosm, it grew into a medium kiliacosm, and then a greater kiliacosm. A greater kiliacosm was a classification of worlds with a huge span. A world at this level was weak, and it was only 100 times stronger than a medium kiliacosm. Even connate Grand Luo cultivators could destroy it. On the other hand, the strong ones could be as strong as the Devil Realm, and they could even give birth to false saints like the Devil Realm saints. They were so strong that even 9th-level pseudo-saints and supremacy venerables couldn't destroy them. This was just like the connate Grand Luo Realm. Strictly speaking, quasi-saints and pseudo-saints were also at the connate Grand Luo Realm. It was only because they were closer to the Saint Realm that they were divided into these two major realms. And then there were so many small realms. In this way, it was clear that after this world formed by words reached the level of a greater kiliacosm, it could grow and strengthen infinitely. But it was not so easy to truly grow to the peak, and it was not so easy to break through the level of a greater chiliocosm. The evolution of this world was not natural. Instead, it was formed through Luo Fan's comprehension of that divine ability, and the constant extension and expansion of the mysteries contained within it. Therefore, every change in this world, every improvement, this meant that Luo Fan's understanding of this divine ability had improved by a little bit. At this moment, the world formed by this divine ability had risen to the level of a greater chiliocosm. It clearly represented Luo Fan's comprehension of this divine ability. It had already reached this level, and this level, compared to Ningzun's comprehension of this divine ability back then, although it was still inferior in terms of depth, in terms of breadth, it was already tens of thousands of times stronger than Ningzun's. Back then, Ningzun had used this divine ability to refine karma that could threaten the supremacy venerables. The depth of his comprehension, it was clearly close to the sage Tao. Needless to say, this depth was naturally not something that Luo Fan's current comprehension of this divine ability could compare to. However, back then, Ningzun's comprehension of this divine ability was limited to the use of this divine ability. He only used the divine ability itself to refine karma. He did not expand this divine ability at all, nor did he evolve the sage Tao within this divine ability. This kind of breadth was naturally far from what Luo Fan was doing. It was obviously much worse than what Luo Fan was doing. Luo Fan and Ningzun's comprehension of this divine ability were obviously in two different directions. Ningzun's comprehension method was superior in that it was pure. It could bring out the magical use of this divine ability to the limit, and could raise the power of this divine ability bestowed by a sage to the peak. On the other hand, what Luo Fan did was to bring out the background of this divine ability. This divine ability originally belonged to a sage's divine ability to the peak and develop it to the limit. Although this method could allow Luo Fan to comprehend more of the mysteries of the sage Tao, it could not bring out the effect of this divine ability perfectly. It could not bring out the basic power of this divine ability bestowed by a sage to the limit. As for which of these two directions was better, it naturally depended on the person's opinion. At least, for Luo Fan, the method he was using now was what he needed. Powerful divine abilities and powerful attacking abilities could be replaced by countless methods. However, the mysteries of the sage Tao could not be obtained at any time. Luo Fan quietly sat cross-legged on the platform as the boundless starry sky around him slowly rotated. The simplicity and mystery of it seemed to be constantly increasing with the passage of time. It looked like a starry sky that had existed since ancient times. In his heart, the incomparably perfect and mysterious world that was formed by words was constantly growing, expanding, and strengthening. After evolving to the level of the vast thousand world, the growth of this world had already slowed down. However, compared to the rapid changes of the vast thousand world, this change was more important to Luo Fan. The benefits that it brought to him were also greater. The growth of the vast thousand world involved changes in all aspects. The changes of the endless laws and laws, the endless changes of the void, the promotion and evolution of the great Tao, everything was complicated and messy. Extracting any part of the process of change was enough to bring great benefits to any pseudo-sage cultivator, and it would become a booster for the promotion of their cultivation realm. Now that it was endlessly appearing here, the benefits that it brought to Luo Fan could be imagined. Through the process of the vast thousand worlds' evolution, Luo Fan gradually understood the mysteries of the vast thousand worlds' evolution. He had a deeper understanding of the foundation of this divine ability, how karma interacted with other laws, time, space, the evolution of living beings, the cultivation of living beings, and everything else. Through this comprehension, he could vaguely sense that his understanding of the Tao that he had cultivated in the past had deepened. It was so much so that he could sense that the foundation of his cultivation had been inexplicably consolidated. There were some hidden dangers that he couldn't discover. Some of his omissions had actually been unknowingly made up for. Aside from that, what made him feel the most obvious change was that his usage of the law of karma had become more fluid. The usage of the second level of the law of karma had also become more relaxed and casual. In a daze, he could even vaguely sense that the third level of the law of karma was already right before him. Naturally, the third level of the law of karma was to reverse karma. Compared to the second level, which didn't require a reason to determine the outcome, it was countless times more profound. Clearly, it wasn't that easy to complete this process. At this moment, although he could vaguely sense that the third level of the law of karma was right before him, he was actually like a mortal feeling extremely hot at noon and looking up at the sky. It was as if the sun was right above his head. It could almost be called an illusion, the current Luo fan. His cultivation realm had increased all the way to the 9th level of the pseudo-saint realm. There were no more bottlenecks. What was needed was a continuous accumulation. As long as the accumulation was sufficient, it would not be a problem. As long as he accumulated enough, he wouldn't need to break through any bottlenecks to obtain a huge improvement. Right now, the process of constantly improving the world that the divine ability had evolved was actually equivalent to a kind of accumulation. It was an accumulation of all the mysteries of cultivation and the essence of all the mysteries of the great Tao. Therefore, during this process, Luo Fan's cultivation realm began to gradually increase. Time slowly passed in this wonderful state that Luo Fan was extremely addicted to. Unknowingly, 10,000 years had passed. In these 10,000 years, Luo Fan had been in the center of this world of flames, constantly comprehending the mysteries of the divine ability and constantly watching the specific growth process of the world that the divine ability evolved from. And his cultivation realm had unknowingly grown to the peak of the 7th level of the pseudo-saint realm. He was only a tiny bit away from truly breaking through the 7th level of the pseudo-saint realm and becoming the 8th level of the pseudo-saint realm. At this moment, in his heart, the world that the divine ability evolved from had grown to a bottleneck. It was a bottleneck that Luo Fan had expected to exist, but he had never imagined that it would exist in such a situation. That great thousand world, through the rapid evolution of the past 10,000 years, had now reached a level that was almost the same as the demon realm and the world that he had just left 10,000 years ago. However, after reaching this step, that world gave birth to a change that Luo Fan had not expected. This change caused the evolution of the Great Thousand World to stop. As a result, although Luo Fan was working hard to break down and expand that divine ability, he could no longer make that Great Thousand World grow even a little. This change was none other than the appearance of a sage in that world. That kind of sage was a kind of sage similar to the sage of the demon realm and the sage of that world 10,000 years ago. The method of becoming a sage used by this kind of sage was not like the sage of the demon realm, who created a great Tao and connected it with the great Tao of the demon realm to become a sage. It was also not like the sage of that world 10,000 years ago, who borrowed the boundless merit of heaven and earth to become a sage. The method that the sage born in this great thousand world used was to control the karma of the entire great thousand world. With this supreme control, he weaved a karma net that completely controlled all living beings and things in the great thousand world, including the past, the present, and everything else. Then, with the great power of this karma net, he obtained the ability to be eternal, indestructible, omniscient, omnipotent, and then became a kind of false sage similar to the sage of the demon realm and similar to the merit sage. After the appearance of this sage, no matter how many mysteries Luo Fan broke down from that divine ability, no matter how much he expanded that divine ability, he could no longer add it to that world. Instead, it could only become resources for the growth of that sage. He could only let that sage continue to grow, make that sage more and more unfathomable, and make that sage more and more like a real sage. This change was beyond Luo Fan's imagination. He was extremely shocked and felt that it was unexpected. However, he faintly felt that it was reasonable. So that's how it is. Luo Fan slowly opened his eyes. There were complicated emotions in his eyes as he thought to himself. After the appearance of a sage in that world, it had become extremely stable. Although Luo Fan could no longer evolve that divine ability and infuse it into that world after expanding it, it allowed that world to grow. However, at the same time, because that world was protected by a sage, it would be difficult for it to regress. It would not be like before if it did not advance or retreat. Once Luo Fan did not infuse it with the gains from the expansion of the divine ability, it would degenerate. Therefore, at this moment, even if Luo Fan did not continue to deepen it, that world was still circulating freely. It looked like a real world. The real world. Thinking of this, Luo Fan's heart moved. Suddenly, a strange thought appeared in his mind. As soon as this thought appeared, he could no longer suppress it. After thinking for a while, he gritted his teeth and slowly closed his eyes. His mind was locked onto the already incomparably huge one. It was an extremely majestic, boundless world. With a thought, a wisp of his mind directly entered that world. It directly turned into an incomparably powerful, eternal, and indestructible existence in that world. An existence that could not be defeated by 10,000 tribulations. An existence that was close to that of a sage. This world existed in his heart. Everything in it was completely constructed, perfected, and created by him. Under such circumstances, he was naturally omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient. In addition, he possessed the holy decree, which could originally emit a wisp of eternal, indestructible, and indestructible aura. Naturally, he was almost no different from a sage. The moment he appeared here, he felt an indescribable and intense pressure surging over him. The entire world actually formed an indescribable pressure on him. Faintly, he seemed to feel that there was a pair of indifferent eyes born from nothingness. It was looking at him from a strange angle, measuring him, and plotting against him. If he was in another world, he would not have any way to deal with such an existence. Not to mention dealing with it, it would be difficult to even discover it. However, in this place, in his heart, in a world that was built by him bit by bit, he instantly found the source of that gaze, and even saw the hidden place of that existence with a single glance. Indeed, just as he had expected, the one looking at him was the sage who had become a sage through the net of karma. Luo Fan had come here to see this sage. At this moment, he did not hesitate. He took a step forward and instantly crossed the barrier of endless time and space. He directly arrived at the sage's dojo and stood quietly in front of the sage. The sage was a middle-aged man. Although it was clear that he was a sage, standing in front of him now, he looked like an ordinary living creature. He sat there quietly and did not seem to be anything special about him. His body did not emit any aura of a sage that should have existed. Even his figure, his shadow, and everything else about him did not seem to be special at all. He completely looked like an ordinary person. From this appearance, it was obvious that Luo Fan could not understand the mysteriousness of this sage at all. Even his eyes could not see the uniqueness and power of this sage. Although he knew this was the case, when he confirmed it, Luo Fan still could not help but sigh. Just as Luo Fan was sighing, the sage with indifferent eyes said, "Are you the creator of this world?" This voice was also very ordinary and did not contain any mysteriousness of a sage. It sounded like an ordinary middle-aged man speaking. Even the words of ordinary cultivators were more mysterious and pleasant to the ears. This was obviously also something that Luo Fan could not understand and could not sense the mysteriousness in it. However, at this moment, Luo Fan did not notice the mysteriousness in this voice. At this moment, he was more concerned about the content of the words. The moment these words entered his ears, his pupils suddenly shrank, and he felt an indescribable shock in his heart. This sage could actually sense that this world was created by him? Then, did this not mean that he had seen through the essence of this world? Did he know that this world was evolved from a sage's magic? It seems that this is the case. I did not expect that my feeling all these years was indeed correct. This is the essence of this world. The sage sighed. What exactly do you know? Luo Fan finally could not help but ask. The sage smiled faintly, and incomparably deep wisdom flashed in his eyes. This kind of deep wisdom was more profound than any living creature that Luo Fan had seen before, or even any living creature that he could imagine. Although this kind of wisdom only flashed by, in a trance, he could already see the endless mysteriousness of the great Tao. It was as if all the secrets in the universe could not be hidden in this wisdom. To be continued. Chapter 1460. Looking at the pair of eyes, Luo Fan finally felt that the person in front of him was a sage. Only a sage could have such a pair of eyes. Only a sage could have such unfathomable wisdom. Being stared at by such a pair of eyes, Luo Fan suddenly felt that his emotions had completely calmed down. All the intense emotions gradually subsided, leaving only a sense of calmness in his heart. This world is a world that was born from a supernormal ability. And the one who built this world is you. This is what I know. Seeing that Luo Fan had calmed down, the sage said plainly. This is already a complete understanding of the nature of this world. Luo Fan sighed. If his emotions had not been soothed by the sage's gaze previously, he would definitely be shocked and agitated now. But now, he only felt that it was natural, and there were no special emotions in his heart. Since you know this, what do you plan to do? Luo Fan asked. What to do? Nothing much. Whatever the nature of this world is, it has no meaning to me. To me, as long as I am real, as long as I have the consciousness of a true self, everything is enough. As for what happens to this world, what does it matter? The sage said. Aren't you worried that I will destroy this world and let it return to that supernormal ability? Luo Fan was even more curious now. The sage suddenly smiled. You can't do it. These words finally made Luo Fan's expression change drastically. No matter how calm he was, no matter how few emotions he had, he was still extremely shocked by what the sage had said, and he could not remain calm. In his heart, the world that he had created, and the living creature that was born in this world, actually said that he could not destroy this world. What kind of unbelievable situation was this? Impossible. This world is only in my heart. If I want to destroy it, it will naturally be destroyed. If I want to degenerate it, it will naturally degenerate. There is no other possibility. Luo Fan said. Before I was born, perhaps that was the case. But now, since I was born, the nature of this world has already changed. Even if you destroy this world in your heart, it just disappears in your heart. However, that doesn't mean that this world will disappear. The saint smiled. Li Hao was extremely puzzled. Disappeared from my heart. Then, where would he be? The saint replied, in the same place. You can't understand where it lies. A place between reality and illusion. Luo Fan sighed helplessly. I see. I thought there would be a fight between us. I didn't expect that I wouldn't have to do this. The sage shook his head. He said, That's not the case. Although, no matter what you do, it will not affect this world. But, if I can completely fuse the divine ability that gave birth to this world into my body, I will be able to grow to the limit. At that time, I will definitely be able to upgrade this world to a perfect world. That's why it's unavoidable for us to have a fight. Luo Fan was shocked. These words could not be any clearer. This saint actually wanted to completely extract his will, his wisdom, and his memories and assimilate them into himself. Realizing this, Luo Fan did not dare to be slow. He raised his hand and grabbed towards him. This grab contained all the power of this vast world that was almost the same as the demon realm. It directly targeted the source of this saint and crushed towards him. At this moment, the sage smiled and waved his hand. Instantly, the extremely tight net of karma that enveloped the entire world shook. Then, an eternal and indestructible power appeared out of nowhere and directly appeared between Luo Fan's grab. All the power that belonged to this world, and this heaven and earth that Luo Fan's grab contained collapsed with a loud bang. This caused Luo Fan's grab to have no more power. It could only be like a normal grab of an ordinary person, reaching towards the saint. If it was any other place, facing such a method, Luo Fan would not have any ability to resist at all. However, here, in the world in his heart, his power was endless. Moreover, he was omnipotent, omniscient, and all-knowing. He was already close to a saint. At this moment, he had already clearly grasped all the details of the method that the saint used when he grabbed towards him just now. In an instant, he felt that his cultivation realm had directly broken through. He directly broke through from the level 7, pseudo-saint realm and instantly stepped onto the 8th step below the saint realm, directly becoming a level 8 pseudo-saint. As he became a level 8 pseudo-saint, he felt that the power of his divine ability had suddenly increased greatly. His strength, which was already much stronger than that of an ultimate venerable, had once again increased by leaps and bounds. It had grown to a level that he did not dare to imagine before. Every single move of a saint contained endless profundities and supreme principles. It was a secret that anyone who had yet to become a saint, even an exalted sovereign or a grade 9, false saint, would need to spend their entire lives to comprehend and ponder over. Now, in the world in Luo Fan's heart, although this saint was only a false saint, he was derived from the divine ability of a saint after all. Compared to a real saint, his essence was already extremely similar. The method that he used naturally also contained the mysteries of a real saint. It contained enough mysteries that were enough for any cultivator who had not become a saint to comprehend for a lifetime. Such a move appeared in Luo Fan's magical ability world. For Luo Fan, it was as if all the profound mysteries were directly instilled into his heart. Although he couldn't fully comprehend all the mysteries contained within it in an instant, he was still able to do so. Although he could not completely comprehend all the mysteries contained in it in an instant, it was certain that he had an extremely deep understanding of it. It was also this deep understanding that allowed him to directly increase the accumulation that he needed, thus allowing his cultivation realm to directly cross the barrier between a level 7 pseudo-saint and a level 8 pseudo-saint, brazenly rushing into the level of a level 8 pseudo-saint. The moment he stepped into the level of a level 8 pseudo-saint, he felt it. The state of chaos in his perception became wider, and the details that he could sense also became more and more numerous. With a thought, Luo Fan's hand that was gently grabbing towards the saint trembled slightly. In an instant, the net of karma that had enveloped the entire world was also triggered by him. It produced an effect that was almost exactly the same as what the saint had displayed earlier. It directly counterattacked, condensing around the saint's body with a loud bang, and abruptly crushing towards the saint. Facing such a mysterious attack that even contained the Tao of a saint, the saint's expression was still extremely indifferent. With a wave of his hand, naturally, a power that was eternal and indestructible flashed past. The power that was pressing down on him became extremely gentle, and it trembled slightly. It had already disappeared without a trace. Then, the saint raised his hand and waved in the air. A world was born out of thin air. It directly enveloped the spacetime within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles. As soon as this world appeared, Luo Fan knew that it was not good. This world itself looked exactly the same as the previous world, but its essence had changed. His connection with Luo Fan had already been covered by some mysterious and peculiar existence. Although he could faintly feel this world, this space and time, he no longer had the absolute confidence he had before. He no longer had the complete control he had before. In an instant, Luo Fan knew that something was wrong. He had still underestimated the means of a saint. With a thought, endless power burst out from his body, crazily filling this world, this space-time, and this space-time, crazily attacking this space-time. Although this space-time was already covered by the space-time created by the saint, causing Luo Fan's control of this space-time to become indistinct. However, this was after all the world in Luo Fan's heart. After all, it was a world that was completely built by him. His authority in this world was still unbelievably strong. His power here was still close to omnipotent. The power that he had burst out at this moment was billions of times stronger than the power that he had self-destructed in the outside world. Even a sage would not be able to isolate the explosion of so much power perfectly. In an instant, this world created by the saint became extremely broken. The fragments of time and space turned into smoke and filled the entire world. The rules and laws were completely broken and turned into huge waves that directly surged towards the saint. Saints were existences that formed their own spacetime. Even their spacetime dimension was completely different from the outside world. Therefore, to a saint, no matter how hasty the changes were, they were not hasty at all. Although Luo Fan had instantly burst out a power that was billions of times stronger than his self-destruction, to a saint, it was not much different from him slowly exploding. However, he could easily react. Although the strength and quality of this power were too terrifying for the saint to perfectly eliminate, the saint could easily control the consequences caused by this power. As for the power that was rushing towards him, fragments of time, fragments of space, and fragments of rules and laws, he did not move at all. He did not even need to make any movement. He only released the aura of a saint on his body slightly. That eternal and indestructible aura made a subtle vibration, and naturally caused the various fragments that were like waves to become gentle. In a flash, a complete world was quickly constructed. A complete space-time was created, and it even directly returned to its original appearance. At this moment, Luo Fan had already broken through the spacetime created by the saint. In an instant, he was directly connected with the world that he had constructed in his heart. In an instant, he completely copied the methods that the saint had used previously. He also had an extremely deep understanding of the mysteries contained within. At this moment, with a single thought, he naturally constructed a world, and completely covered the world that the saint had constructed in front of him. He once again eliminated the weakening effect that originally existed in this world, which had weakened the connection between him and this region of the world. It was even to the extent that this connection became even tighter and more profound instead, that Saint still did not care about such a change. His expression was still extremely indifferent. He raised his hand and made a grabbing motion towards Luo Fan. This grab looked extremely ordinary and normal. There was no special aura or charm within it at all. It felt like an ordinary person, a baby, was stretching out his arm to grab something. But it was such a grab that made Luo Fan feel like he could not resist it at all. He watched this change with his own eyes. However, he realized that this palm was so ordinary and so effortless. It had already reached his side, and was about to grab him in its hand. So powerful! Luo Fan's eyes lit up. With his control over this world, although he was completely unable to sense the mysteries of this grab, he directly used the complete replication method to copy this grab. He also raised his hand to grab. The moment he raised his hand and grabbed, he suddenly felt the profoundness of this grab. At this moment, endless mysteries flashed across his mind. In a trance, the surrounding time, space, matter, energy, rules and laws, cause and effect, and even the great Tao seemed to have become a part of his body. He did not need to control it. All of them began to cooperate with his grab in an unimaginably exquisite way. This allowed the power of his grab to increase infinitely. This allowed his grab to, it actually produced a feeling that could grab all worlds, even the perfect world, in his hand and casually knead it. It was as if he could destroy it at will, and change it at will. Is this the feeling when a saint attacks? This thought appeared in Luofan's mind. There was a soft poof. His grab directly collided with the saint's grab. A wave swept across and instantly destroyed the area that was covered by the world he had constructed, which was also the area that was covered by the world that the saint had constructed. This kind of destruction was not even the kind that Luo Fan had caused when he had fought with the aura of the saint in that world 10,000 years ago. This kind of destruction was even more serious and terrifying. Under this destruction, this area, the space-time within a radius of billions of miles, instantly turned completely gray. This wasn't just a scene of chaos. Instead, it was completely, truly genuine. This was the true state of chaos. The kind of chaotic state that could give birth to countless perfect worlds with just a little bit of it. If it was under normal circumstances, entering such a state, Luo Fan would definitely have been assimilated by it immediately and completely turned into a part of the chaotic state. However, at this time, he was displaying that grab of the saint. To him, the chaotic state around him, to him, was like a gray fog, and had no effect at all. The place where he stood directly formed its own spacetime. Everything in the gray state of chaos around him was surging and turbulent, but it did not affect him at all. Instead, it made him feel happy and carefree like a fish in water. This feeling was even more comfortable and pleasing than anything else in that world, so this is the feeling that the chaotic state brings to the saint. Perhaps the reason why no one can find the saint is because those saints are actually in a chaotic state. However, the real saint is in a true chaotic state, and the saint of the demon world, the saint of that world 10,000 years ago, is like this in a chaotic state that they created themselves. Such a thought flashed through Luofan's mind. At this time, in the place where he was looking, which was the position in front of him, that saint, just like him, was extremely relaxed and comfortable in that chaotic state. At this time, the indifferent state that he had always been in seemed to have weakened a lot. This saint looked at Luo Fan, and a smile suddenly appeared on his face, and he said, Have you comprehended it?" Luo Fan was stunned, and his thoughts turned at lightning speed. Very soon, all the doubts from before were rediscovered by him. He suddenly realized what was going on. This saint actually did not have any intention to deal with him at all. The reason why he had said all those previously was actually to give him a reason to fight, and the reason was actually to let him comprehend the true feeling of this saint, to let him have a deeper understanding of the saint. After understanding this, he heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. The pressure that this saint had given him previously was really too great. Even in the world in his heart, even though this saint was clearly built by him, he was still a saint after all. Even if he had the ability to be omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient in this world, he only had the confidence to be in a stalemate with this saint, and did not have the slightest bit of confidence to really defeat him. Under such circumstances, naturally, the pressure that he had to bear in his heart was naturally imaginable when he walked into a completely opposing position with this saint. Now, he suddenly heard that this saint actually did not completely treat him as an enemy. That feeling was self-explanatory. After heaving a sigh of relief, he was puzzled again. Why? He directly asked this doubt. Hearing this doubt, that saint suddenly smiled and said, I use karma as the Tao. Although you did not intentionally create me, you still created me after all. This kind of karma from the creation of the body is the greatest karma in the world, and even a saint cannot completely cut it off. If I do not end this karma, I will not be able to truly transcend. There are many ways to end karma. Killing me is also a way. It is also one of them. Luo Fan frowned and said, Great kindness turned into enmity, that was a common saying in the secular world. However, in the cultivation world, it also made sense for the cultivator just now. The karma of the creation of the body itself was incomparably huge. In addition, Luo Fan was now to this saint. It was not even just the karma of the creation of the body. There was also the karma of him becoming a saint. Such a huge karma. If he were to repay it in a normal way, other than letting him become a saint, he could not think of any other way to end this karma. In comparison, if he were to be killed directly, this karma would lose one end, and naturally, it would be considered to be over. This was countless times easier than using the normal method of returning the favor to end this karma. If he were to choose, there was a high chance that he would use this method. And with such a thought, he did not believe that this saint would not have such a method. Hearing what Luo Fan said, the saint did not care at all and said, "If this was your original body here, I naturally would not need you to say so much, and would naturally kill you directly. However, are you in your original body?" Hearing this, an indescribable chill suddenly surged in Luo Fan's heart. At this moment, he was extremely glad that he had used this incarnation to comprehend the profoundness of the saint's mystical ability. He was extremely glad that he had used this incarnation to build this mystical ability world. He did not dare to imagine what would happen if he used his original body. However, how deep was the truth that the saint had sensed? Was it his main body in the gap between the world and the chaos, his main body in the primordial world, or his clone in the Tianyuan world? Thinking about it, he sighed and said, as expected, "It seems that I'm still lucky. Previously, I almost used my main body to study this saint's mystical ability." "This is your luck, but my misfortune," the saint sighed and said. As he spoke, the saint did not say anything else. He directly opened his mouth and spat out the sounds of the great Tao in this chaotic state. These sounds of the great Tao were extremely mysterious and wonderful. He did not need to use his ears to listen at all. In fact, he did not even need to use his heart to listen. Instead, he directly used his life source and his life essence to listen. These sounds of the great Tao could not be described with any words. After they left the saint's mouth, they naturally caused the endless chaotic state around him to undergo an inexplicable change. Every sound of the great Tao opened up an indescribable world in the chaotic state. The mysteries contained in the sounds of the great Tao were directly displayed in front of Luo Fan. Together with the vibrations that the sounds of the great Tao transmitted to the life source, Luo Fan could intuitively feel the mysteries contained in the sounds of the great Tao. Almost at every moment, he felt that his soul was being sublimated. He felt that he had comprehended some extremely deep and profound mystery. However, when he tried to search and understand, he realized that he couldn't find out what he had comprehended or what he had received. Such a process was like a dream or an illusion, and the passage of time had become meaningless. It seemed like billions of years had passed, but it also seemed like only a moment had passed. Luo Fan suddenly returned to his senses from that state. At this moment, the chaotic state around him had returned to its original state. It returned to its original gray state. Time, space, matter, energy, and everything else were all mixed together in a different way. Chapter 1461. Thank you, Saint, for your guidance. Luo Fan sighed and bowed to the saint. At this moment, he could clearly feel that he had successfully cultivated the saint's divine power. Although he couldn't express the many mysteries of the saint's divine power with words and couldn't transmit them to others, he already knew and could use them. This was the effect of the great Tao voice that the saint had chanted. This saint was born from that divine power, and the deepest mysteries of cultivation contained in his body were the mysteries contained in that divine power. In this way, the great Tao voice that he preached naturally contained the mysteries of this divine power. The saint's expression was indifferent. He just nodded slightly and didn't care about Luo Fan anymore. Luo Fan knew what he meant, but he didn't pester him. With a flicker of his heart, the consciousness naturally dispersed and returned to his body. When he returned to his real body, he found that the position of the saint that he could clearly feel had become extremely blurry at this moment. It was as if there were countless layers of frosted glass. He could only roughly know that the saint was in a state of chaos, but he couldn't get any more details. This is a saint. Luo Fan sighed. At this moment, he could clearly feel how powerful and terrifying a saint was. Even the saint in the world that existed in his heart had such a terrifying power that was completely out of his control. If they were to fight a real enemy, he didn't even have the confidence to defeat him. When Luo Fan woke up, he suddenly felt an inexplicable vibration. Then, in the boundless world of flames outside his cave abode, an earth-shattering quake suddenly took place. Amidst the tremors, the peerlessly powerful and incredibly stable laws of the world of fire crumbled inch by inch, as if they were made of tofu. The boundless flames were extinguished at an extremely fast speed, as if they were ordinary flames that were covered with mud. Such a change made Luo Fan instantly understand what was going on. The Book Supreme and the others had found out that he was here. But now, he couldn't even be bothered to speak. They directly attacked him. Secondly, the reason why the flame world had such a change that was akin to the end of the world was actually because the power of these attacks had leaked out. Upon discovering this, Luo Fan's heart stirred. The cave residents instantly shook and directly swallowed the suppressing fire outside, turning the cave residents into a ball of fire that was completely isolated from the outside world. It was formed by the fusion of the suppressive flame and the apocalyptic flame. The flames were in a strange balance. This flame was calm and contained the power of the world-extinguishing flame and the fire of suppression. However, these two powers were extremely restrained. Floating there, anyone who saw it would think that it was just an ordinary flame. It was impossible to tell that it actually possessed such terrifying power. This ball of flame existed independently of everything in the outside world. Even if it was the law layer of this flame world. Even the great Tao of this world, the strands of the great Tao of the universe on Earth, could no longer affect this flame and everything inside it. At this moment, the entire world of flames disappeared. It was replaced by a spiritual light. It was an indescribably wonderful color that couldn't be described with words. It was a spiritual light that couldn't be described with any adjectives. This spiritual light was obviously the root cause of the fiery world's destruction. After it replaced the fiery world, it suddenly turned into a huge hand. With a slight movement, it pinched the flame formed by the fusion of the suppressive flame and the world-extinguishing flame between two fingers. Then, it pressed down with great force, trying to crush this flame. This pinch. Not only did it contain power, but it also contained infinite time and space and infinite power. It could seal everything, suppress everything, and destroy everything. Under this pinch, even a level 9 fake sage would definitely die instantly. Even the most powerful venerable would not be able to survive if they were unprepared. However, the moment this pinch came into contact with the flame, it was like firewood coming into contact with fire. All the spiritual light was instantly ignited. In the blink of an eye, the fiery world that had been replaced by the spiritual light reappeared. However, this fiery world that had appeared had nothing to do with the previous fiery world. There were no similarities. Instead, it was a brand new fiery world with that flame as its true core and origin. Among them, the living beings that were born in an instant were completely different from the original fiery world. However, it was similarly profound and contained endless mysteries within it. If anyone knew about the world that was derived from the divine ability in Luo Fan's heart, they would know that although this fiery world looked completely different from that world, it was extremely similar in nature. From the looks of it, it was as if they had developed from the same source, but had walked on two completely different paths to two different worlds. When this world was born, it was at the level of a great thousand world. After that, it produced power at a crazy rate. It devoured everything that could be devoured and everything that couldn't be devoured. It started to grow at a speed that made people feel despair. It didn't take long for it to surpass all the great thousand worlds and vaguely approach the demon realm and the central world. As this fiery world evolved, the figures of dozens of level 9 pseudo-saints and supreme venerables gradually appeared in this world. These level 9 pseudo-saints and supreme venerables were distributed in all directions of this world in a strange manner. They vaguely formed a vast and earth-shattering array formation. This array formation contained the entire world and locked it down firmly. It was extremely powerful and could erupt at any time to completely destroy everything it wanted to destroy. These level 9 pseudo-saints and supreme venerables were nothing else. They were the Book Supreme, the Life Supreme, and the others. Moreover, they weren't the only ones. Apart from them, there were even more unfamiliar level 9 pseudo-saints and 3 other supreme venerables. Looking at it, there were already 7 supreme venerables and dozens of level 9 pseudo-saints in this world. Such a force was truly unimaginably powerful. It even felt like they could deal with any existence that wasn't a sage. Even a saint venerable would have a headache for a long time facing such a lineup. However, at this moment, the Book Venerable and the others didn't look happy or confident. On the contrary, all of them were surprised and bewildered, and every single one of them raised their senses to the limit. They tried their best to sense this world and search for the location of Luo Fan. There was no other reason. Although they had formed this array formation, they didn't appear here of their own accord. It turned out that they were outside this world and had used this array formation to deal with this fiery world. They had come to seal everything in this world so that they could use the power of many supreme venerables to search billions of great thousand worlds to lock onto Luo Fan's location so that he wouldn't be able to escape. However, just as they launched their attacks, they suddenly realized that they didn't see their opponent being destroyed in front of them. Instead, the world was suddenly destroyed, then reborn. Then, they appeared in this world as if they couldn't withstand the gravitational pull of that world. How could these level 9 pseudo-saints and supreme venerables calmly accept such a strange change? This world is very strange. Very strange. Venerable Life said at this moment. Even at this moment, the Life Venerable was definitely at the top of this lineup. Therefore, he was qualified to speak like he used to. That's right. The whole world is growing rapidly. It looks like it's almost reaching the level of our world. Another Supreme Venerable said. Where is he? Another Supreme Venerable said with a frown. He's there. The Book Venerable suddenly said, gritting his teeth. At this moment, a strange flame appeared in the center of this world. This flame looked just like the flame produced by an ordinary match. However, everyone present was at least a level 9 pseudo-saints, and many of them were supreme venerables. Who would be wrong about this? Everyone was able to tell how extraordinary this flame was with a single glance. They could see the terrifying power hidden within the flame, as well as the aura of the target of their operation, which was hidden in the area in such an obvious situation. How could they not know that Luo Fan was hiding in this flame? At this moment, the flame changed slightly. Luo Fan, who was made of flames, replaced the original position of the flame and appeared in the center of this world, facing the dozens of level 9 pseudo-saints and 7 supreme venerables. I didn't expect so many people to come to deal with me. It seems that I'm quite influential. Luo Fan, who was made of flames, said with a smile. At this moment, even those cultivators who looked down on Luo Fan and thought that the Book Venerable was making a fuss over a minor issue completely suppressed their previous thoughts and didn't dare to have such thoughts anymore. Although the figure in front of them was only made of flames, it had a close connection with the whole world. It was also filled with an eternal and indestructible aura. It was an aura that was even stronger than the holy intents of all the supreme venerables combined. It was close to the aura of a sage. Although this aura was formless and intangible, it brought them immense pressure. It made each of them feel as if they had turned into mortals. Their spirits, their bodies, their everything was being crushed by a huge mountain. They felt as if their spirits would collapse in the next moment, and they would be crushed into minced meat. Facing an existence that could emit such a strong aura that was close to the level of a sage, they would be courting death if they still dared to look down on him. The book Venerable noticed that something was wrong. He shouted, "Open!" As he spoke, the book-like artifact above his head started to flip its pages rapidly. As the pages of the artifact flipped, artifacts appeared above the heads of the dozens of level 9 pseudo-saints and supreme venerables. Moreover, all of the magical treasures released precious light, and through the book, they connected with every other magical treasure, ultimately forming a huge network. The huge array that they had vaguely formed was completely revealed, forming countless thin and dense lines that ran through the whole world, turning the whole world into an extremely strange and dangerous scene. It also completely destroyed the endless fiery creatures that were born in this world. All the power returned to its original form and was almost completely repelled. That array, the moment the array changed, the terrifying power that was pressing down on the hearts of the level 9 pseudo-saints and supreme venerables disappeared completely, making them feel inexplicably relaxed. They felt like they had returned to their own world. Sensing this change, Luo Fan, who was made of flames, smiled faintly. He didn't move and just looked at them quietly. When they had completely completed this process, they completely repelled the strong aura of a sage that could only be found in this world. After it no longer affected them. He then said faintly, "Fellow Taoist master, I will say it again. I don't know where you are now. No matter how much you pester me, I will give you the same answer. You have the ability to defeat me, kill me, and extract my memory." This was also the result he got. So, it's better to retreat. At this moment, the Book Supreme's face twitched slightly. He already somewhat believed that Luo Fan really didn't know where their master was, and he somewhat believed that even if he defeated Luo Fan, he still wouldn't get the answer he wanted. However, since things had come to this, how could he still retreat? If he retreated, how could he explain it to the other cultivators? How could he explain it to those supreme venerables? After spending so much effort and suffering such a huge loss, in the end, he had to retreat without a fight and submit in humiliation in front of the opponent. Even if he was the disciple of the Holy Venerable, who was known as the most powerful cultivator below the sage, he would definitely not be able to get any advantage. By then, he might not be directly chased by the Holy Venerable, but he would definitely be trapped by them. Therefore, the Book Supreme could only say at this moment, "This point is no longer meaningful now." He didn't say it clearly, but everyone present knew what he meant, including Luo Fan. "I knew you weren't ordinary at the beginning, but I didn't expect you to be so extraordinary. It's a pity that if we had known this earlier, perhaps we wouldn't have made such a choice." The Book Supreme sighed in the end. As he spoke, the book-like magic treasure above his head suddenly sped up. As it sped up, an infinite treasure light gathered in front of him and turned into an electric light that even this world couldn't bear. This electric light contained the power of 7 holy wills, which was so powerful that it was earth-shattering. Around this electric light, time and space collapsed, the rules and laws were destroyed, and even a large part of the tributary of the Great Way was directly destroyed. After the electric light was formed, it fiercely struck at Luo Fan without any hesitation. Wherever the electric light swept across, the world returned to chaos, and a gray existence directly condensed like smoke wherever it passed, drawing a mysterious and infinitely mysterious trajectory in the void. Facing this electric light, Luo Fan just smiled. He casually waved his hand, and the entire world collapsed with a loud bang. Infinite karma turned into a giant hand, which slightly squeezed the electric light that contained the power of 7 holy wills, instantly crushing it into pieces. Countless light spots scattered in all directions, and eventually disappeared. Then, the giant hand seemed to split into dozens of hands, which directly followed a mysterious channel, and came in front of the dozens of level 9 pseudo-sages and ultimate venerables in the blink of an eye. It directly squeezed their magic treasures, wrapping them up, and instantly cutting off the connection between them and the magic treasures. The level 9 pseudo-sages and ultimate venerables couldn't help but let out shrill cries. Luo Fan casually waved his hand, and the dozens of level 9 pseudo-sage magic treasures were already in his hand. It bounced up and down on his palm like a small bead. As for the world of flames that had been completely destroyed, time seemed to flow backward, and it began to condense again. Gradually, a complete world of flames appeared around everyone. By this time, the level 9 pseudo-sages and ultimate venerables had already stopped screaming. Everyone's faces were pale, and they looked at Luo Fan, who was in the middle of the world of flames, as if they were looking at a monster. No one dared to speak at this time, including the Book Supreme, the Life Supreme, and the others. At this point, they had truly understood how powerful Luo Fan was. They knew how huge the gap between them and Luo Fan was. They knew that even if their numbers increased by 10 times or 100 times, they still wouldn't be able to hurt Luo Fan, and they wouldn't be able to achieve the goal that the Book Supreme had originally wanted to achieve. Under such circumstances, even if their natal magic treasures were in the hands of Luo Fan, they didn't dare to say anything. In fact, they didn't even dare to take out the other magic treasures that they still had. Any level 9 pseudo-sage would not only have one natal magic treasure. There were more or less other level 9 pseudo-sage treasures. All of them definitely existed. However, generally speaking, because other magic treasures were more or less incompatible with the Daos that they cultivated, the power that they could exert could only be limited to the power of the magic treasure itself. They couldn't be like natal magic treasures, which were extremely compatible with the Daos that they cultivated. Therefore, they could promote each other and perform exceptionally well. Therefore, even if they had other level 9 pseudo-sage treasures, they would only use their own natal magic treasures in battle. I wonder if you will believe what I say now? Luo Fan said to the Book Supreme with a smile. This situation. It's the most persuasive situation. Even if you say that you are actually the incarnation of a sage, we will still believe you. The Book Supreme sighed. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and said, It's good that you believe me. I hope that from now on, you won't find anyone to cause trouble for me. It's very troublesome to find a new hiding place every time. I think, after what happened today, I won't be able to find anyone to cause trouble for you even if I want to. Therefore, you can rest assured, the Book Supreme said helplessly. At this moment, there was an indescribable frustration in his heart, but at the same time, there was also a strange sense of relaxation. Luo Fan was like this at this moment. It was hard for him to accept and imagine that he was far more powerful than they could understand. But at the same time, it was precisely because of Luo Fan's despairingly powerful strength that the others were really afraid of. Under such a situation, if he gave up causing trouble for Luo Fan, they would no longer be dissatisfied. Instead, they would be grateful to him. This was equivalent to letting go of the heavy burden that he had been carrying. For him, of course, it was a little relaxing. Luo Fan smiled and waved his hand. The dozens of level 9 pseudo-sage treasures in his hand flashed and returned to their original owners. They floated quietly in front of them. Obviously, they had been sent directly back to them. Looking at the unexpected situation in front of them, all the level 9 pseudo-sage and supreme venerables were slightly stunned. They had originally thought that these natal magic treasures had become someone else's spoils of war and had nothing to do with them anymore. There was a faint sense of despair in their hearts. They were even thinking about how to refine their natal magic treasures in the future, and how many years it would take to fully restore the power of their magic treasures and regain their previous strength. All of a sudden, these magic treasures were sent back to them. That feeling was like seeing a glimmer of hope in the abyss of death. It was imaginable how shocked they were. At this moment, how could they care about anything else? Of course, they quickly grabbed their respective natal magic treasures, quickly infused their strength into them, and put these magic treasures back into their own bodies. Only at this point did they heave a sigh of relief. There's no need to send them off. Everyone. Luo Fan looked at them and said with a faint smile. Although they had retrieved their magic treasures, their fear of Luo Fan did not decrease. Instead, it increased. At this moment, they had no intention of attacking Luo Fan. They hurriedly bowed to Luo Fan, turned around, opened a space-time tunnel, and went out of the entire world. Throughout the whole process, they did not even say a word to the Book Supreme and the rest. The Book Venerable and the others didn't show any dissatisfaction. They looked at each other and somewhat bitterly bowed to Luo Fan. Then, they joined forces to open a space-time channel. More than a dozen people entered it and disappeared in this world of flames. As they left, all the space-time tunnels closed one after another. The entire world of flames returned to its original peaceful state, as if nothing had happened. Chapter 1462. At this moment, although Luo Fan didn't feel lucky, he was much more relaxed. The reason why he was able to subdue the dozens of Class 9 pseudo-sages and the 7 supremacies so easily and take away their treasures before returning them to them as if they were babies was because they were in the hands of a baby. It was because he had just performed the divine power of the sage that he had comprehended from the sage's sermon in his heart. The power of the divine power of the sage was indeed unimaginably powerful and mysterious. When he performed the divine power, he felt that the Class 9 pseudo-sages and the Supreme Venerables in front of him had become babies. All the changes in their bodies and their karma were under his absolute control. This allowed him to bypass the divine power that they had performed and attack their most fundamental weakness, allowing him to do whatever he wanted to them. However, this divine power was a sage's divine power after all. Although Luo Fan had a clear understanding of the nature of his cultivation, and the power of his divine ability was much stronger than that of an ordinary venerable, but compared to a saint, it was still a far cry. For him, this divine ability of a saint was obviously beyond the limits of his perfect control. Under the guidance of a sage, he could perform the divine power perfectly. However, the consumption of energy in the process was so huge that it made one feel hopeless. Although he had only used that divine ability for a short period of time, he felt as if he had experienced a tragic battle that lasted for billions of years. The consumption of energy, the exhaustion of his spirit, the exhaustion of his body, the exhaustion of his spirit, and even the exhaustion of his life force had almost reached his limit. If the Book Supreme and the others hadn't left just now and wanted to continue fighting. Indeed, he could continue to easily deal with them, and continue to play with them as if they were babies. However, if that were to happen, it would bring him immense pain. He might even have collapsed. This was the reason why Luo Fan felt relieved after seeing the Book Supreme and the others admit defeat and leave. The divine power of the sage is indeed extraordinary. Luo Fan let out a long breath and sighed. He had already stopped using the divine power of the sage. As he stopped using the divine power, the flame world that was growing rapidly and undergoing drastic changes also stopped changing. Its state gradually stabilized. The reason why the flame world could undergo such changes after being reconstructed and grow to a stage where it surpassed ordinary vast thousand worlds and was even approaching the level of the demon realm was because Luo Fan was using the divine power of the sage. The divine power was extremely mysterious and profound. The moment it was performed, the world of flames seemed to be responding to this divine ability. It began to evolve and change naturally, resulting in this completely illogical change. This was similar to when Luo Fan was comprehending the divine power of the sage. The endless words that were derived naturally formed that strange world, and its nature was the same. From this, it could be seen that if Luo Fan continued to maintain this state of casting this divine ability, this world would definitely be able to grow almost limitlessly. In the end, it might even give birth to a sage, allowing this flame world to truly grow into a powerful world comparable to the demon realm and the central main world. Of course, this was in theory. In reality, this possibility was almost impossible. The evolution of the world needed time. The birth of a sage also needed time. In his heart, how much time did it take for the world to evolve from zero to the stage where a sage was born? 10,000 years. And that? It was because in his heart, he didn't need to consider the time, the flow of time, and the impact of the change in time on the stability of the world. If this period of time was converted into real time, it might be hundreds of millions of trillions of years. In other words, if Luo Fan wanted to transform this flame world into an almost perfect world, a world that was equivalent to the demon realm, he would need to maintain the divine power of the sage for at least hundreds of millions of years. Not to mention the fact that the universe on Earth did not have such a long time for him to waste here. In other words, based on the amount of pressure he had to endure when he used this saint ability for a short period of time, if he were to maintain this saint ability for more than a day, he would not be able to withstand the pressure and his life source would collapse. Hundreds of millions of years? It was better not to think about it. From this, it could be seen how difficult it was to create a sage, even if it was just a false sage with a thought. The flame world naturally opened up a small world to serve as his cave abode. He directly entered the cave abode, sat cross-legged, and began to enter the deepest state of meditation. Although there were still many things to do and many things waiting for him to comprehend, he was exhausted because he used the divine power of the sage previously. If he did not fully recover, how could he do those things? As Luo Fan entered the deepest state of meditation, time passed slowly. Unknowingly, 1,000 years had passed. After such a long time, Luo Fan finally let out a long breath, feeling refreshed as he returned to his senses from that meditative state. After coming back to his senses, he calculated a little and found out that he had actually been in meditation for 1,000 years. He could not help but smile bitterly for a moment. He had only used the divine power of the sage for a short while, and he needed to spend 1,000 years in meditation to recover. If things were more troublesome and he needed to use this divine power for a longer time, wouldn't he not have enough time? However, perhaps using time acceleration to recover is a good choice. Luo Fan's heart suddenly moved, and he thought so. Ever since he set foot on the 9 steps below the sage and became a false sage, cultivation could no longer be completed by the accumulation of time. Even other things that needed to be done could not be completed by the accumulation of time. Therefore, from then on, it was already extremely rare for him to make use of time acceleration to cultivate. Now, for the sake of this divine power of the sage, he actually needed to pick up this cultivation method that he had abandoned for God knows how many years. This made him feel rather emotional as he thought of this. He raised his hand and waved it. 2 seals appeared in his hand. They were the Heaven and Earth Merit Seal and the Heaven and Earth Karmic Fire Seal. These 2 seals were completely opposite of each other and had opposite powers. Even though their powers had not been activated and they were just lying quietly in Luo Fan's hand, they were already faintly exuding a kind of tit-for-tat, faintly repelling each other and distancing themselves from each other. After witnessing that sage mystic ability, he felt a huge change when he looked at the 2 seals in front of him, which he had been confused about back then. It turned out that the fog covering these 2 seals seemed to have been blown away by a breeze. The profound mysteries that were originally vague suddenly became very clear. In fact, it felt so familiar. It seemed that he had actually seen the mystery of these 2 seals before, but because it was too deep and too long ago, he had unknowingly forgotten about it. It was only when he saw it with his own eyes that he remembered it again. This feeling was so strange, but it also gave him an indescribable sense of satisfaction. As someone who understood the essence of cultivation, Luo Fan instantly found the source of this familiar yet strange feeling. It was clearly from the divine power of the sage. It was not the divine power of the sage itself, but Luo Fan's understanding of the divine power of the sage. It came from his understanding of the divine power. Although Luo Fan could not completely grasp this kind of understanding at this moment, he was still able to understand it. He used his own words to sort it out, but it had always existed in his heart and in the depths of his memory. As a divine power of the sage, it was all-encompassing and could even give birth to a sage. How vast must it be? One could imagine. Although the mystery of the merit of heaven and earth and the karmic fire of heaven and earth were deep and unfathomable, they did not deviate from this vast scope. Because of this, at this moment, when Luo Fan looked at these two seals again, he originally understood the mystery of the merit of heaven and earth and the karmic fire of heaven and earth. However, he was unable to find the mysteries of the karmic fire of the universe, and the karmic fire of the universe gradually surfaced, giving him this inexplicably familiar feeling. With this feeling, Luo Fan sighed and waved his hand. The two seals suddenly came together and instantly merged into one, forming a strange seal. The words that appeared at the bottom of this seal were not words like merit, karmic fire, or heaven and earth, but two words that should not have appeared: authority. This seal had shockingly turned into a seal of authority. Looking at this seal, Luo Fan was not surprised at all. Instead, he showed a look of realization. He thought to himself, merit is the positive authority given by the heaven and earth, and the karmic fire is the deprivation of authority by the heaven and earth. Together, doesn't that make it authority? Items of merit seemed so mysterious, and even seemed to produce all sorts of unbelievable power from the level of karma. But in fact, its essence was a type of authority in the heaven and earth. The manifestation of this kind of authority was extremely obscure, and it was bestowed to the existence of the merit through various methods that were similar to karma. Its manifestation was also different in every world. The difference between the merit of heaven and earth and ordinary merit was also the difference between the size of the authority. But, at the end of the day, its essence was still authority. Similarly, it was the same for the karmic fire. However, the authority of the karmic fire, which corresponded to the merit, was a negative authority. Strictly speaking, it was a form of rejection, a form of targeting. As for the difference between the karmic fire of heaven and earth and ordinary karmic fire, it was just a difference in intensity. But now, what Luo Fan did was to fuse the merit of heaven and earth and karmic fire of heaven and earth together. In an instant, the two opposites neutralized each other and completely disappeared. What was left was the final and most fundamental nature of authority. That was why the two seals had fused together in such a strange way, resulting in the appearance of such a seal of authority. As he stroked the seal of authority, Luo Fan suddenly felt that his authority in the fiery world seemed to have undergone a subtle change. However, because this fiery world was originally created by him, his authority in this world had already reached an extremely powerful level. Therefore, the change in authority caused by the seal of authority was not obvious. It was submerged in the terrifying authority that originally existed, making it difficult for him to grasp his realm. He discovered this. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. He raised his hand and pointed. In an instant, a small space-time tunnel appeared in front of him. This space-time tunnel led to a completely unfamiliar place. A strange, vast world. Luo Fan did not know anything about that vast world. He only knew that it was a vast world. After building this space-time tunnel, he threw the seal of authority in his hand into it without hesitation. In an instant, his authority seal directly passed through the boundless space and time, drilling into a completely unfamiliar greater thousand world. At this moment, Luo Fan felt boundless joy descend upon his heart through the seal of authority, and he instantly grasped it completely. In his days, he even felt that he'd completely understood everything about the boundless world and had complete control over it. In an instant, he knew that if he were to enter the great thousand world now, he wouldn't have to wait like before. He would be able to become a saint in the great thousand world and be omniscient, omnipotent and omniscient, as expected of the seal of authority. Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Right now, the seal of authority was only barely formed, so the authority power contained within it was not very strong. Therefore, it could only have such an obvious effect on the great thousand worlds, such as the demon realm or the central world. In that case, the effect wouldn't be so obvious. However, since it had already formed, there was naturally a possibility of improvement. As long as he could improve enough in the future, he would definitely be able to do the same things in the demon realm as he did in the great thousand world. He would be able to do the same things in the demon realm as he did in the great thousand world. He would be able to obtain that supreme authority and become omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient. If he continued to improve on this foundation, he might even be able to reach this step in the entire Earth's universe. At that time, there might still be some differences between him and a true saint in this Earth's universe, but it definitely wouldn't be as huge as it was now. Sensing the bright future, Luo Fan suddenly became a little excited. He raised his hand and gently waved. The seal of authority passed through a space-time tunnel and landed in his hand in the blink of an eye. As soon as the seal of authority entered his hand, he felt the changes in it and couldn't help but frown. The seal of authority was much lighter and more blurry than before. It was as if the effects of entering that world had consumed a lot of the authority power in the seal of authority. It can actually be consumed. If the authority was actually consumed, then its usefulness would be greatly reduced. After all, if a portion of the authority was consumed every time he entered a world, wouldn't the process of replenishing the authority be endless? Just as Luo Fan was secretly having a headache and secretly feeling disappointed, he suddenly felt something and a faint smile appeared on his face. He lifted his foot and took a step forward. His figure had already left his cave abode and arrived in the flame world, hovering in the void. Just as he stood still, a space-time tunnel suddenly materialized in front of him. Then, a figure materialized and appeared in front of him. This figure was not someone else, but someone he was extremely familiar with. The Holy Venerable. After the Holy Venerable arrived, he saw Luo Fan at first glance and smiled. "Long time no see, fellow Taoist. You still look as elegant as ever. It might be a long time for you, but for me, it's only tens of thousands of years. It's a great joy to be able to see you today." Luo Fan smiled. Hearing this, the Holy Venerable sighed and said, "I almost forgot. All these years I've stayed in that world for trillions of years. My sense of time is a bit messed up." As they spoke, more than 10 figures began to walk out of the space-time tunnel behind the Holy Venerable. They were the Book Master and the other disciples of the Holy Venerable, as well as Wu Zun's confidants. At this moment, their faces were rather calm, but there was a hint of shame in their eyes. "This is..." Luo Fan was confused. The Holy Venerable said, "These evil disciples. I've been wholeheartedly cultivating, but they've brought you so much trouble. Today, I'll hand them over to you. You don't have to be courteous with me if you want to kill them or torture them." Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and said, "Why do you have to make such empty promises? For existences at our level, is there any meaning to such empty words? For existences at our level, do you have any reason to come here? Just tell me. Fellow Taoist, why have you come here? Just tell me." The Lord's words were too fake. Even if Luo Fan blamed the Book Supreme and the others for the trouble they had brought him, could he really kill them when the Holy Senior was guarding him? The Lord's words were obviously just an excuse. If he really believed it, then he must be out of his mind. The Lord did not feel embarrassed at all when he was exposed. Hearing this, he only smiled and said, "Since fellow Taoist has asked, I won't hide it anymore. This time, I came to find you, in addition to letting them settle their karma with you." However, he had another purpose. "I would like to ask for your help. Settling karma is a small matter. Although they chased after me for so many worlds, they didn't cause me any harm. Instead, they gave me quite a lot of benefits." Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, "I won't pursue this karma. Let it end here." As he said this, the Book Supreme and the others felt their bodies relax. The heavy burden on their hearts seemed to have been lifted in an instant. If they could see through the river of luck and find their own world of luck in the river, they would realize that after Luo Fan's words, the connection between their world of luck and Luo Fan's world of luck had brought great pressure to their world of luck. The sudden break allowed their river of luck to return to its original relaxed state. It was unknown how the Holy Venerable sensed the change. He smiled and said, "Thank you for your forgiveness. Thank you for your forgiveness, Luozun." At this time, the Book Supreme and the rest did not dare to delay and quickly said. Luo Fan only smiled and said, "Since the first matter has been settled, what is the second matter that you are talking about?" The Lord did not answer Luo Fan first. He turned to the Book Supreme and the rest and said, "This matter is of great importance and is not something you can participate in. Therefore, you should return to the Devil realm first, cultivate quietly, and work hard to improve your realm. In the future, I may need your help." The Book Supreme and the rest seemed to be reluctant to leave. After hearing what the Lord said, they wanted to say something but stopped. "Go." The Lord smiled faintly. Hearing this, the Book Supreme and the rest had no choice but to bow to the Lord. Then, they turned to bow to Luo Fan and retreated into the space-time tunnel, disappearing from this world. As they left, the space-time tunnel also gradually disappeared. Not long after, the space-time at that location returned to normal. There was no longer any abnormality. After they left, Luo Fan said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, your real body should still be in the world you created, right? For you to come here with a clone projection at this time, could it be that there is a problem with that world?" Hearing this, although the Lord's expression did not change, Luo Fan felt as if his sore spot had been touched, and there was an inexplicable suffocation. Seeing that the Lord, who could almost be called the first person below the sage, could not control his emotions and showed such a bitter expression, Luo Fan was suddenly shocked. Could it be that he had really encountered some shocking difficulties? Otherwise, how could someone like the Lord be unable to control his emotions to this extent? Thinking of this, his expression became serious. He began to listen attentively and did not say much. He quietly waited for the Lord to speak. The Lord pondered for a while and then said, "My world has now passed through the 6th crisis of heaven and earth, and will soon face the 7th crisis of heaven and earth. Initially, I was quite confident that I could pass through the 7th crisis of heaven and earth, but recently, there has been a change that I cannot control. So, I have no choice but to come and ask for your help." Chapter 1463. What the Lord said next confirmed Luo Fan's speculation, and his facial expression changed drastically. This was because the Lord had said, "A saint has been born in my world." Upon hearing this, Luo Fan was dumbfounded. "A sage can be born before the 7th heaven and earth tribulation?" He murmured, "Why is it that in the past, seeing anything related to a saint seemed like an extravagant hope, but now saints appear at every turn?" At this moment, the Lord seemed to recall all the things that were happening in his world. He heaved a long sigh with a helpless look on his face, but he did not interrupt Luo Fan's mumbling. After all, Luo Fan was not an ordinary person. Very quickly, he had already gathered his thoughts and said, "How many sages are there? Just one person is enough to make me anxious. If it wasn't for the fact that I'm the creator of that world and am omnipotent in that world, I wouldn't have been able to deal with him. He is omniscient and omniscient. I'm afraid that he has already been destroyed by the saints." If there are a few more of them, I'm afraid that even with my identity in that world, I won't be able to handle it." The Lord sighed. "Since you're a saint, why did you come to look for me? Although I'm confident that I'm not weaker than a supreme being, I'm still not confident that I can defeat a saint," Luo Fan said helplessly. "I learned of your abilities from those unworthy disciples. That's not something an ordinary supreme cultivator can do. Even I don't have much hope of escaping from you. If there is a cultivator in this world who is not a sage but can still help me, then it must be you, fellow Taoist," the Holy Venerable said. Luo Fan listened. He could only sigh helplessly. Since the Lord had already said so, it was not appropriate for him to deny it. In any case, he was only here as an avatar. More importantly, he was very interested in the saint that was born from the Lord's world. One had to know that the development of the Lord's world was very likely to be the future of the world in the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. Therefore, he could only sigh and say, "I can go with you, but you must fill up this seal." Saying, he raised his hand and took out the seal of authority that he had just condensed. The Lord heard that Luo Fan was willing to go. His eyes could not help but light up. When he saw the seal of authority that Luo Fan took out, his expression froze. With a wave of his hand, the seal of authority fell into his hand. He spun the seal of authority a few times and looked at it carefully. The Lord could not help but compliment, "Your ingenuity is indeed admirable." He was actually able to create such a miraculous seal. To be able to turn an intangible authority into something so substantial. Luo Fan did not explain the origin of the seal of authority. She just smiled and waited for the Lord's decision. The Lord's expression did not change much, but his eyes flickered with various thoughts. It was obvious that he was weighing whether it would be a loss to use the seal of authority to deal with the saint that was born in the world. He was the creator of the world. As the existence that helped the world to survive through 6 calamities, his power in the world was really not much different from that of a saint. Although it was his first time seeing the seal of authority, it was already extremely easy for him to fill it up in the world. No matter what kind of things were needed to fill up the seal of authority, it was not a problem for him at all. In an existence that was almost perfect, the potential of everything in the world must be infinite. No matter how many things were used up, as long as the Lord wanted it, it could be replenished naturally. However, this did not mean that the Lord would not care about filling up the seal of authority. One had to know that once the seal of authority was filled up, its owner, namely Luo Fan, could use the seal of authority to obtain almost unlimited authority in the world. This kind of almost unlimited authority was enough to make Luo Fan a supreme existence that was close to that of a saint. Even the power of his supernatural power could be comparable to that of the Lord. It would be extremely difficult for the Lord to make him leave and expel him. This was a huge risk. Apart from an idiot, no one else could easily make such a decision. The Lord carefully considered the advantages and disadvantages of the proposal and finally agreed. This was because he knew that even without the seal of authority, he would definitely need to use a similar method to increase Luo Fan's authority in the world. He needed to make Luo Fan have a power that was comparable to that of a saint in the world. Only then would Luo Fan be able to help him and face the saints together with him. Without such power, Luo Fan would only be like an ant in front of the saint in the world. Why would the Lord waste his energy to seek help from such an existence? Now that Luo Fan had made the seal of authority, although it might be more autonomous, more independent, and more difficult to take away than the authority granted by the Lord, from Luo Fan's point of view, it was inevitable for him to make such a choice. If it was him, he would definitely make the same choice if he had a solution. Since that was the case, the Lord could only agree if he wanted Luo Fan's help. Hearing that the Lord had agreed, Luo Fan then nodded and said, "In that case, thank you, my friend. I just got this seal of authority, but I haven't fully understood how to fill up the authority in it." The Lord smiled helplessly and said, My friend, please. As he said this, he raised his hand and pointed to the void. A colorful space-time tunnel appeared in front of him and Luo Fan. The aura behind this space-time tunnel was an aura of absolute nothingness. Obviously, this space-time tunnel was connected to the world that the Holy Senior had created. After the Lord signaled to Luo Fan, he took a step forward and stepped into the space-time channel. In the blink of an eye, he had disappeared from the flame world. Luo Fan let out a sigh and glanced at the world he had opened up. He followed behind the Lord and entered the space-time tunnel. At the moment when he left the world, there was a thunderous sound in the world. The whole world shook slightly. An inexplicable sadness and an indescribable reluctance came from everywhere in the world. It came from the law of the world, and from the tributaries that existed in the world that belonged to the Earth's universe. This sadness, it was a loss of support. In other words, it was the sadness of losing one's parents. At the moment when this sadness emerged, all the living creatures in the world that had the ability to shed tears, they would naturally shed tears. This was the world. It was sad for the departure of its creator. It was sad for the abandonment of its creator. This change lingered for a long time. It lasted for a few years before it finally calmed down. However, to Luo Fan, this was no longer something that he cared about. At this moment, Luo Fan had already passed through the space-time channel and appeared in a strange void that only had one strange world existing in it. That world was obviously created by the Lord. He wanted to cultivate it into a perfect world, or even a real big world, so that it would become the foundation for him to become a saint. At this moment, the world appeared in the center of the void. It was like a golden elixir that was suspended in the void. Around this world, there was a mass of gray clouds that wrapped around it. This cluster of clouds was extremely mysterious and profound. It faintly emitted a chaotic aura, and it felt as if it was all-encompassing, as if all the profundities of the universe were contained within it. With Luo Fan's familiarity with the state of chaos, he could tell at a glance that although this gray cloud was not really in the state of chaos, it was already extremely similar to the state of chaos. Compared to the gap between the universe and the chaotic state, the endless gray existence was even closer to the chaotic state. There was no need to see how much the world had developed. Just by looking at the layer of gray clouds that was almost in a state of chaos, Luo Fan already knew that the world must have grown to an incredible level over the years. It seems that after going through the sixth apocalypse of heaven and earth, this world is close to the real perfect world and will soon be able to exist freely in the chaotic state. Perhaps the seventh apocalypse of heaven and earth will be the last obstacle it will encounter. Luo Fan thought, and suddenly, there was an inexplicable expectation in his heart. What the Lord was doing right now, he was also doing the same. If the Lord could really walk to the end of this path, did it not mean that he could also walk to the end of this path? The world created by the Lord could be comparable to the real perfect world after going through the seventh apocalypse of heaven and earth, and could really exist in the chaotic state. Did this not mean that he could also cultivate his own world to such a level and really let his own world exist freely in the chaotic state? If that was the case, then the apocalypse of heaven and earth that was about to arrive billions of years later, which would destroy the entire universe and cause it to no longer have any possibility of triggering the apocalypse of heaven and earth, would it not affect him anymore? Would it not mean that he would be able to obtain unlimited time and finally walk to the saint state and finally become a real sage? Thinking of this, even Luo Fan could not help but feel a little excited. At this moment, the Holy Venerate had already entered the dusky clouds. It was the seal of authority that Luo Fan handed to him. Obviously, at this moment, the Lord was officially going to fulfill his previous agreement with Luo Fan and fill up the seal of authority. Luo Fan was not in a hurry. He floated in the void and quietly watched the rolling of the cloud while waiting for the Lord to send out his seal of authority. This wait lasted for nearly a month. After a month, the the surging gray clouds suddenly underwent a strange change, producing an irregular change. Then, the Lord's incarnation pushed the surrounding gray cloud away and walked out from it, appearing in front of Luo Fan. In his hand, the seal of authority had undergone an earth-shattering change. The size of the entire seal did not change much, but its appearance and aura were completely different. At this moment, the seal of authority did not look dim at all. At this moment, the seal of authority no longer looked dim. Instead, it looked very noble and powerful. When it was held in the hands of the Saint Venerable, it felt like a sun. It seemed to contain enough power to destroy everything. Unsure if it was an illusion, Luo Fan always felt that the Lord's expression was not very good. Of course, he did not mind. He just smiled and said, "Thank you for your hard work, Holy Venerable." The Lord nodded reluctantly. This time, "It's really not easy." After saying that, he sent the seal of authority to Luo Fan. Luo Fan raised his hand and grabbed the seal of authority. Instantly, an incomparably wondrous feeling welled up in him. It seemed. Suddenly, there was something in the void in front of him that he was extremely familiar with. Something that was of great benefit to him was calling out to him and attracting him. Immediately after, an endless amount of information appeared in his mind out of thin air. This information. It was information about a world that looked like a golden core. It contained the various rules and laws of that world, the great Tao of that world, the various basic conditions of that world, and even the information of the saints that existed in that world. As expected, Luo Fan let out a long sigh of satisfaction. He pressed his hand down and pressed the seal of authority into his chest. When the seal of authority entered his body, the various feelings that were brought about by the seal of authority became even more intense and obvious. The strong and dazzling light that was contained in the seal of authority and the incomparably noble aura were completely covered at this moment. They disappeared without a trace and could no longer be found. After doing this, Luo Fan said, "I'm ready. Let's go in." The Lord nodded calmly and said, "My friend, please." After saying that, he turned around and stepped into the gray cloud without hesitation and disappeared in front of Luo Fan. He did not care how Luo Fan entered the cloud. Perhaps this was also a manifestation of his depression. After all, he had just given the highest authority of the world that he had created to another cultivator. No matter what, he would feel a little depressed. In this regard, Luo Fan was quite understanding and did not care. With a faint smile, he also stepped into the dusky cloud without any hesitation. The gray cloud was an existence that was extremely close to the state of chaos. If an ordinary cultivator or even a supreme exalt were to step foot into it, then it was extremely likely that the cultivator would be devoured and assimilated at the first possible moment. It was as if they'd encountered the true state of chaos, and they would directly perish while their souls dispersed. However, Luo Fan naturally would not be like that. At this moment, Luo Fan already had the highest authority of the world that was created by the Lord. The gray, almost chaotic existence was born because of that world. Naturally, it was also a part of that world. Therefore, it was obviously not a threat to Luo Fan. When Luo Fan stepped into it, the gray cloud did not even need to be controlled by him. He did not need to brush it away. It naturally moved to the sides and revealed a space that allowed him to pass through. This made it extremely easy for him. He did not encounter any obstacles as he passed through the cloud and arrived outside the world that was like a golden elixir. Looking at this world that he had not seen for a long time, other than the appearance on the surface, Luo Fan could not find any similarities between this world and the world that he had seen before. The entire world, at this moment, was placed in front of Luo Fan in a completely unfamiliar position. The changes are so big. It seems that the Lord has adjusted the structure of this world many times over these years. Luo Fan sighed. He took a step forward and passed through the barrier of the world. He directly appeared in that world and appeared next to the Lord. At this moment, he already had a completely different feeling from when he was outside. It was a feeling of omniscience, and omnipotence. It was a feeling that there was no living creature in this world and nothing that could hurt him. At the same time, he also felt that the flow of time in this world was many times slower than before. At this moment, the flow of time in this world was only tens of thousands of times faster than the outside world. The flow of time was still extremely fast, so fast that it was even faster than ordinary people could imagine. However, compared to the beginning where hundreds of millions of years passed in just a breath, it was already many times slower. The difference between the flow of time and that of the Earth's universe had also been shortened by many times. This obviously meant that the gap between it and the real perfect world had also been reduced by many times. Of course, this was not because the flow of time in the Earth's universe was the fixed flow of time in the perfect world. Instead, it was because the normal flow of time in the Earth's universe was the flow of time that was deeply engraved in the Lord's life. It was also where the Lord's time dimension was. If the world that the Lord created had become a perfect world, it would naturally be the same as the Lord's time dimension. The flow of time should naturally be the same as the flow of time that was deeply engraved in the Lord's life, and this, obviously, it was the same as the flow of time in the Earth's universe. It was precisely because of this that there was an inference that the flow of time was closer to the flow of time in the Earth's universe, the closer it was to the perfect world. Luo Fan sensed it slightly and smiled at the Lord. It seems that we have really passed through another catastrophe. This world will transform into a real perfect world. It can exist in the chaos for a long time. Due to the lack of foundation, this world could not be the same as the real perfect world. It did not need to pass through the catastrophe to become a perfect world. Instead, it needed to grow continuously in the process of passing through the catastrophe to finally reach the level of a perfect world. Moreover, because of some kind of rule that Luo Fan still couldn't understand, no matter how many great tribulations of heaven and earth it went through to grow into a perfect world, after it went through 9 great tribulations of heaven and earth, it would inevitably become a great world. However, this kind of big world might only be slightly stronger than a perfect world. Compared to a normal big world, there was still a huge difference. No matter what, it was still a big world. It would be free from catastrophe and would no longer be threatened by the catastrophe. It could exist forever, and there was no need to worry about when it would be destroyed. This was the most important thing for a cultivator. As for whether this big world was strong or weak, it did not matter. If he was not satisfied with this big world, he would have the ability to create another one after he became a saint. By then, he would be as strong as he wanted to be, theoretically, yes. However, there is still one last obstacle. The Lord nodded and sighed. Luo Fan listened to the Lord's sigh but only smiled and said, "This obstacle can be solved. Although a saint was born, I think the difference between you and the saint is not as big as you think. I think it will be beneficial for him if this world passes through the catastrophe." The Lord sighed and said, "You don't know. Although it's beneficial for the saint to survive the tribulation, it's insignificant compared to the other option." Luo Fan was stunned and asked, "What option?" The Lord smiled bitterly. "Devouring the catastrophe and turning all the power of the catastrophe into resources for one's own growth so that one can achieve greater growth. Compared to letting this world pass through the catastrophe, this option is naturally more attractive to the saint." "How did you know about this?" Luo Fan was shocked. He had never thought of this option before. He could imagine that the sages born in this world were definitely not real sages. Instead, they were just like the sages of the devil world and the sages of the central main world. He could also imagine that the saint must want to become a real saint and remove the fake word. However, he had never thought that the saint would actually want to use the power of the great trial of the world to achieve this. The Lord sighed and said, Back then, when I sensed that a saint was born in this world, I was secretly excited. I thought that a helper had appeared, so I went to talk to him and found out about it. So that's how it is. No wonder you know about it. Luo Fan came to a sudden realization. He knew the reason behind it, but his eyebrows were deeply furrowed. At this time, he deduced again and found that compared to helping the world pass through the catastrophe again and again to grow, the best choice for the fake saint was to devour the power of the catastrophe to achieve his own growth. One must know that the great tribulation of heaven and earth could even cause the entire world to transform. It did not seem impossible for a false sage to transform into a true sage. On the other hand, if a false saint were to become a true saint, then it would be a tremendous change. From then on, they would no longer be controlled by any world, and they would be able to exist freely in the chaotic state and live independently. At that stage, what powerful world could not be created, and what great world could not be obtained? Chapter 1464. Why don't we meet the sage first? Luo Fan suggested. Just do as you wish. There are still about 10 million years until the seventh great tribulation of heaven and earth, but there's a lot of time for you to control yourself. The holy venerable sighed. Luo Fan nodded. With a thought, he found a place in this world that did not belong to this world. With a thought, he took a step forward and appeared outside that place in the blink of an eye. It was a piece of chaos. Or rather, it was a strange state that was extremely similar to chaos, but it was not the true state of chaos. This was also the place where the sage was in the world in Luo Fan's heart. This place was fundamentally different from the outside world. The various mysteries in it reflected the various mysteries of the state of chaos. It was also the most comfortable place for the fake sage. If the fake sage could turn this strange state of chaos into the true state of chaos, it would mean that he had become a true sage from a fake sage. In other words, before becoming a true sage, the fake sage would not be able to withstand the true state of chaos at all. The distance between this place and this world was extremely strange. It looked like nothingness, yet it also seemed to contain an endless amount of things. It was extremely mysterious and profound. At this moment, Luo Fan also had the power of a sage in this world. All the chaotic environment around him did not affect him at all. In fact, compared to the outside world, the dusky and strange state of chaos in front of him made him feel even more comfortable and joyful. There's a guest coming from afar. Don't tell me the sage doesn't welcome him? Luo Fan looked at the gray state in front of him that did not respond at all and smiled. Upon hearing this, the gray state surged slightly. Then, a place calmed down. It vaguely formed a passage that directly extended into the depths of the gray state. This passage was not the passage that really existed. Instead, it was a passage formed by the gray state calming down and distinguishing it from the chaos outside. This passageway still looked gray, and it was filled with a strange state similar to the state of chaos. Luo Fan smiled faintly, lifted his feet, and stepped into that strange, dusky state step by step. As he stepped into that strange gray state, he felt an indescribable sense of comfort welling up in his heart. He even felt that his breathing had become much smoother, and his body had become much lighter. It was almost as if the shackles that were originally placed on his body had been reduced by a lot. I can finally enjoy this feeling again. I really miss it. Luo Fan took a deep breath. As he inhaled the grayish substance into his lungs, a warm current spread along with it, making his entire body feel inexplicably comfortable. In this strange state there was no time or space. After a short while, Luo Fan arrived at the center of the dusky state. Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim in surprise when he saw what was happening. What's wrong? Do you think that a saint can't be a woman? An extremely gentle female voice came into Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan sighed and said, "Of course not, I'm just surprised. I didn't expect that the first person to become a saint in this world would actually be a woman. I originally thought it would be a man." That's not surprising. Even in this world, the idea that men are superior to women is quite popular. The one who spoke was a woman. She looked extremely delicate and pretty. She had a well-proportioned figure, and her entire body exuded an inexplicable charm. This woman was obviously the saint of this world. She stood there, and the dusky airflow around her seemed to be rotating with her as the center. It constantly circled around her body, and vaguely seemed to transform into one world after another, and these worlds were rapidly being destroyed and destroyed. It formed a complete and cruel cycle. This was because there were simply too many of these worlds, and the changes were simply too fast. Therefore, on the contrary, it seemed so ordinary, as if there were no changes at all. It completely blended into the dusky surroundings, and if one was not careful, it would be easily overlooked. The saint glanced at Luo Fan and said, "You have the aura of a saint on you. You've come into contact with a saint before." When Luo Fan heard that, he smiled and said, "I knew you would be able to tell. That's right, I've indeed come into contact with another saint, and I've listened to that saint's teachings for quite a long time. However, if a saint wants to meet him, I'm afraid it's impossible. Therefore, there's no need to tell me your request." "You're very smart." The saint smiled and said, "It's all right. If I wasn't smart enough, I would have died many times over." Luo Fan sighed and said, "Do you want to know what I think about this world?" The saint suddenly asked. "I want to know all the thoughts of a saint, including his views on this world." Luo Fan said without hiding anything. The thoughts of a saint and the thoughts of a saint were indeed what he was curious about, and what he cared about. Even if the saint in front of him was not a real saint, and was merely a fake one, it would still be the same. This world is a cage that imprisons me and prevents me from transcending. The saint sighed and said, "Indeed." Luo Fan recalled the feeling when he stepped into this strange and misty state, and instantly agreed with what the saint said. He had only obtained the power of a saint, but he already felt inexplicably comfortable in this strange state that was similar to the state of chaos. He felt the intense feeling of breaking free from restraints and obtaining freedom. This was the feeling of a real saint in this world, so naturally, it was even more obvious and intense. However, although he admitted that this was a cage, Luo Fan did not plan to continue the saint's words. Instead, he said, "However, it's also this cage that made you a saint. Without this cage, you're just an ordinary cultivator." "That's right. I agree with that. If it wasn't for that, why would I still stay in this world? I would have left this world long ago and entered a wider world." The female saint did not refute his words and said calmly, "If that's the case, then why aren't you willing to waste some time to help this world survive the great tribulation of the world? Anyway, you have unlimited time, don't you?" Luo Fan said. "Why do you have to say such lies?" The saint said calmly, "Do you think that I can't see the essence of this world? This world's foundation is extremely weak, even with my brand new help. There will only be another 2 or 3 great tribulations of the world. When that time comes, this world will be destroyed. As a saint who can't escape this world, even if I leave, I will no longer be a saint. How can there be unlimited time?" The saint said calmly, "There has to be a way. Although the foundation of this world is lacking, it's not enough. Although the foundation of this world is weak, there must be a way to make up for it. If I don't try, how can I give up so easily?" Luo Fan said, "It might be possible to make up for it, but if there's an easier choice, why not choose it? I will use the power of the great tribulation of the world as resources and become a saint who can truly transcend the world. When that time comes, how many worlds will I open? How many worlds will I be able to open? Moreover, it will be a truly perfect world without any flaws in its foundation. Why waste time on a world with such a weak foundation?" The saint said. However, Luo Fan sighed. He suddenly realized that what the saint said made so much sense that he actually couldn't refute it. To a saint, the existence of a world was like his hands and feet. Just like the sand on the roadside, he could play with it however he wanted. To such an existence, he was asked to take risks for a broken world with a weak foundation. Moreover, he was risking his own death. How could she be willing? Not to mention her, even he himself probably wouldn't be willing either. But you guys. Why are you so attached to this world? If you can help me absorb the power of the great tribulation of the world and help me turn from a false saint to a true saint, then I can easily open up a perfect world for you. Even if you want a big world, I can also nurture one for you. Isn't that better than being entangled in this world with a weak foundation? The saint said. When Luo Fan heard this, he didn't even consider this possibility. He directly shook his head and said, "That's impossible." It was indeed impossible. Not only would the Lord not agree to it, but even he would never agree to it. The world opened up by the saint was only the saint's world. If the female saint in front of him became a real saint and opened up a real perfect world in the state of chaos, or even grow this perfect world into a real big world, it would only belong to this female saint. Even if she gave this world to the Lord and Luo Fan, it would not change the nature of this world. What was the difference between Luo Fan and the Lord entering such a world and being in the universe on earth now? There would still be a saint above their heads, and they would also be unable to control their own lives and destinies. If they could accept this, why would the Lord work so hard to open up a perfect world? Why would he work so hard to let this world survive the great tribulation of the world again and again? Was it because it was fun? Why not? If I become a real saint, the perfect world will be as ordinary as the sand on the roadside to me. I won't care at all if I abandon a few of them to you guys. When that time comes, you guys will just be ants to me, and I won't ignore my identity to deal with ant. So, what do you guys have to worry about? Isn't this kind of solution the best solution? That saint said. Maybe this is the best solution. However, it's not me, and it's not something the Lord can agree to. Luo Fan shook his head and said, and more importantly, I don't think you can use the power of the great tribulation of the world to turn the false into the real and become a true saint. If you swallow the power of the great tribulation of the world, the biggest possibility is that you will perish together with this world. The saint said, I don't think so. Since the tribulation of heaven and earth can turn a perfect world into a world without tribulations, immeasurable and everlasting, why can't it turn a false saint like me, who is close to a real saint, into a real saint? What I need to do is to completely absorb all the power of the great tribulation of the world at that time and turn it into resources for my transformation so that I can become a true saint. You see, it's very simple, isn't it? That's impossible. If you really do that, you will definitely perish together with this world. There's no doubt about that, Luo Fan said lightly. Regarding this, Luo Fan only had a vague idea at the beginning. He was not sure about this. However, as time passed, he had already confirmed this point. He truly understood that no matter what method this false saint used, as long as they did not recognize the key to becoming a saint, then it would be impossible for him to become a true saint. That key was to establish a world view that completely belonged to him. Thinking of this, he could not help but feel regretful. It turned out that when he knew that this saint planned to use the power of the great tribulation of the world to turn the false into the real, in the depths of his heart, he had an inexplicable urge to try this method of becoming a saint. He would first become a false saint in the near-perfect world that he had created, then attract the power of the great tribulation of the world, devour it, and turn into a true saint. But now, after thinking of the true key to becoming a saint, he knew that wouldn't work. He now knew that there were several ways to become a false saint. Among them was the method to become a saint through merit, the method to evolve the great Tao and merge it with the true great Tao, and the method to become a saint with the help of the mystical ability of the saint. All of these methods were enough for him to easily become a false saint in his own world. However, no matter what method he used, the path he took, it was impossible for them to be the same as his worldview. In other words, even if he had sorted out a worldview that completely belonged to him and was completely in line with his understanding of the world, as long as he used these paths to become a false saint, it would be equivalent to him betraying his own worldview. At that time, the possibility of him advancing further would be cut off. From then on, he would never be able to become a true saint, and he would never be able to transcend the world that he had created. Even he was like that. The false saint in front of him hadn't even sorted out his own unique worldview, so how could he break through to become a false saint? Become a true saint? Because of this, his words were resolute and decisive, and he was very certain. The female saint looked at Luo Fan. Her eyes were so deep that they seemed to contain all the wisdom of the universe. It was as if she could see through all of Luo Fan's thoughts at a glance. "You're so sure. You must know something. Perhaps I should carefully search through your memories and study everything you know," the female saint said. Hearing this, Luo Fan frowned and said, "I think you shouldn't be able to do such a thing now. You'd better give up on such plans." Hearing this, the female saint said, "We'll see if I can do it or not." As she spoke, the female saint raised her hand and stretched it out towards Luo Fan. This move looked extremely ordinary, but in Luo Fan's eyes, it seemed to contain all the mysteries of the universe. With this grab, he suddenly felt an indescribable restriction on his body, as if everything about him was enveloped by this grab. This, however, was much more than what he had felt the last time he had faced the attack of a saint. The reason for this was because he had already comprehended the saint's divine ability. Now that he saw the false saint's divine ability, it naturally resonated with the saint's divine ability when he saw the false saint's divine ability. As a result, he was able to sense some of the profundities of this grab. This allowed him to see the mysteries of the saint's attack. However, although this saint was only a false saint, the false saint was only fake because she was limited by the world and couldn't transcend and be free. In fact, her power was actually not much different from that of a real saint in this world. Therefore, although the mysteries contained in this false saint's attack were not stronger than that of the saint's mystique, it also contained many mysteries that the saint's mystique did not. However, it also contained many mysteries that the saint's divine ability did not. After all, this attack was not the saint's divine ability, so the mysteries of the two could not be completely equal. As a result, what Luo Fan could see was only a part of the mysteries of this attack. Fortunately, Luo Fan's authority in this world was omniscient, and omnipotent. The moment this grab appeared, his authority allowed him to temporarily obtain the mysteries of this grab, allowing him to know how to use this move. As such, he raised his hand at the same time and made a grabbing motion toward the woman saint. There was a soft poof. Countless worlds were born at the point where their hands came into contact, and then they were completely destroyed in the next moment. Moreover, this kind of destruction was not the kind that constantly appeared around the female saint's body, the kind that could be reborn and transform into the birth of world. Instead, it was the kind of destruction that completely turned into nothingness. Luo Fan used the same method and the same move, but he completely blocked this female saint's grab. It's a pity that once I leave this world, I'll forget the mysteries of this move. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to work so hard for that saint's mystique. What a pity! Luo Fan sighed in his heart. Although this grab had completely copied the mysteries of the saint's move and was not inferior to the female saint's, it was a pity that this was not Luo Fan's own ability. Unfortunately, this wasn't Luo Fan's own ability. It wasn't that he had truly comprehended all the mysteries contained within, but that he was now omniscient and omniscient. This was given to him by the omnipotent authority. Strictly speaking, it was not Luo Fan who had learned to use this move, but the world that was using this move. It was just that it was under Luo Fan's control, because of this nature, once Luo Fan left this world, he would completely forget how to use this move. Although he clearly remembered that he had done this in the past, the subtle changes in this behavior, he would completely forget. He would completely forget that in his eyes, this move should be so ordinary, just like an ordinary person's claw. He would no longer be able to understand the profoundness contained in this move. The female saint frowned, retracted her palm, raised her hand, and gently waved it. In an instant, Luo Fan felt that all the worlds in his body, all the space-time, all the cells and even everything else, seemed to be getting out of his control, wanting to obtain the right to exist independently, and directly disintegrating him as a whole. I see. In an instant, he was suddenly enlightened, but with the help of the omniscient, and omnipotent Supreme Authority, he directly understood the mysteries of this move. He directly comprehended the profoundness of this move. With a slight tremble, he completely blocked the changes of this move. Next, he did not use the same mystical ability, but instead raised his hand and reached out, grabbing at the female saint. He was going to use the same move that the female saint had used on him just now. He was going to subdue her. The female saint frowned, raised her hand, and pointed. In an instant, countless worlds turned into shields and appeared before that hand, allowing Luo Fan's hand to directly grab onto the shield. An existence that seemed like power but was not power instantly surged out from the countless worlds, instantly grabbing onto his hand. Next, a palm appeared in the countless worlds at the same time, a palm that was the same as Luo Fan's, slapping toward Luo Fan with almost the same posture. Seeing this, Luo Fan was shocked. With so many hands slapping out at the same time, it was not a fun thing to do. With a thought, he waved his hand, and in an instant, countless worlds condensed into shields in front of him, blocking the countless palms. Not good! Suddenly, Luo Fan shouted in his heart. His body quickly took a step back. With this step back, his body directly came out of that grayish, chaotic state. At this moment, he felt the world shield that he had constructed collapse with a loud bang. Sure enough, before fully mastering all the magical powers of a sage, I can only be in a stalemate with him at most. I still don't have the slightest chance of winning. Luo Fan secretly sighed. Just now, the mystical ability of the world shield that the female saint had used had the ability to defend and double the backlash. This ability was extremely powerful, but it had the ability to withstand it. This was especially so for saint-level powers. Therefore, when he used the same method and constructed the same world shield, he was unable to double the backlash of the attack that had already gone through the double backlash. After blocking the attack, in the process of the double backlash, all the worlds suddenly collapsed and were completely destroyed by the attack. Chapter 1465. This was the attack of the woman sage. Her omniscient, and omnipotent authority allowed him to master this move in an instant. However, this move also had the same effect as the previous world shield. Although he had already mastered the mystery of this move and was able to perform it, he was unable to use the same move to deal with this move. In desperation, he could only move his body and retreat tens of thousands of light-years away in order to barely get out of the range of this move. Fortunately, he was able to master the mystery of this move. Otherwise, even if he wanted to get out of the range of this move, it would have been impossible for him to escape this attack. This kind of authority granted by the Creator is really too troublesome. A murmur sounded in Luo Fan's ears. Then, Luo Fan felt that the normal space-time around his body instantly became like the place where the woman sage was, almost in a chaotic state of gray. In this gray state there was no space or distance. Although the two places were separated by tens of thousands of light-years, the moment it took shape, they were already connected. Luo Fan looked up and found that the woman sage was not far away from him. She looked indifferent and was looking at him with eyes full of boundless wisdom. Luo Fan could not help but smile and said, "What do you mean by this, sage? I need your memory." the woman sage said faintly. That's impossible. Don't even think about becoming a sage. Luo Fan shook his head firmly and said. You can't escape now and you can't leave. Although I can't deal with you for the time being, that's only temporary. However, that is only a temporary matter. One day, I will definitely be able to subdue you, that female sage said. When Luo Fan heard this, he laughed and said, If you stay here with me, it's exactly what I want. As he said this, Luo Fan raised his hand and clapped. The slap that the woman sage used on him that he had seen before was directly displayed. He slapped the woman sage fiercely. The woman sage frowned. She raised her hand and waved it, and a strange change appeared. Similarly, it contained mysteries that surpassed the limits of Luo Fan's understanding. Following this change, Luo Fan's slap directly collapsed. It didn't have any effect at all. Not even the changes that triggered this strange state of chaos appeared. Luo Fan saw this. He was not discouraged. Instead, he was overjoyed. In this world, in this heaven and earth, there was nothing he did not know. Omniscient and omnipotent. As long as the woman sage used something, he would be able to grasp it in an instant. The more powerful the technique that the woman sage used, the more powerful the technique he used in this world would be. At the same time, it also meant that his combat power had become increasingly powerful. How could he not feel happy under such circumstances? He raised his hand and punched out without any hesitation. This punch was not one of the techniques that the woman sage had used before. Instead, it was formed by condensing all the power and destructive power of the entire world. It was an incomparably pure destructive power, an incomparably pure destructive power. In this world, although it did not contain the mystery of the way of the sage, it had already reached the extreme of destructive power. Even if a sage had the ability to resist and eliminate such an attack, it would require him to risk the destruction of the entire world and the complete destruction of the entire world. This, of course, did not matter to a real sage. If it was destroyed, then it was destroyed. However, for a false sage who was controlled by this world and could only be a sage in this world, it was completely unacceptable. Therefore, although countless ways to repel Luo Fan's attack flashed through the woman sage's mind, in the end, she could not use any of them. She could only move her body and disappear from Luo Fan's sensing range. She disappeared from the range that Luo Fan could lock onto with the power of this world. She used this method to avoid Luo Fan's extremely pure destructive attack at this time. This attack instantly completely destroyed the strange state of chaos in front of Luo Fan. It caused the surroundings to turn into nothingness. Then, very quickly, under the effect of the rules of this world, everything was restored and the original appearance of this place appeared again. At this moment, the incomparably pure destruction had already returned to the world, but it would no longer cause any damage to the world. At this time, Luo Fan had a faint smile on his face. Of course, what he was happy about was not that he had forced the woman sage to retreat, but that he had already mastered the method that the woman sage had used to dodge and move. Or, it had been controlled by this world and given to him. I didn't expect a sage to dodge in this way. Luo Fan looked at the countless indescribable mysteries that appeared in his mind. He felt that he could not even find a way to comprehend them, but he had completely understood them. He could not help but sigh in his heart. After mastering this method, he already knew the location of the woman sage. At that moment just now, the woman sage had directly integrated herself with the whole world, making herself a part of this world. Or rather, she had become this world. She was not in any one place, but at the same time, she was in any place in this world. It was with this method that she had avoided Luo Fan's detection, and even avoided the detection of this world. After all, just like an ordinary person, he might have an unimaginably deep understanding of his own planet, or a deep understanding of a certain planet in the distant starry sky. However, it was not so easy for him to sense his own heart and the shape of his internal organs, after the woman sage had integrated with this world. If this world wanted to detect her, it would be equivalent to an ordinary person trying to sense the shape of one of his internal organs. It was obviously not that simple. At this time, the woman sage had already reappeared in that gray, almost chaotic state. She looked over from afar, her eyes shining directly on Luo Fan. That strong sense of existence was so strong that he could not ignore it even if he wanted to. At this moment, the woman sage no longer had any intention of concealing her sage aura. That incomparably powerful aura, which had even evolved into an infinite world, directly spread out and shrouded the whole world. This aura contained the infinite way of the sage, which was enough to make all cultivators dream of obtaining it. Along with this aura, it was the woman sage. She slowly walked toward Luo Fan. As a sage, the whole world was her domain. The world itself was the will of the world. Everything was almost under her control. She traveled like this. Heavenly music filled the air, colorful clouds danced, and heaven and earth resonated. All kinds of strange visions surrounded and protected her, making her seem so sacred, so noble, and so mysterious. She walked leisurely, but her speed was extremely fast. The distance of tens of thousands of light years was easily crossed by her almost in an instant. In the blink of an eye, she had already arrived in front of Luo Fan. After arriving here, she stood quietly, looking at Luo Fan. Her eyes had become extremely indifferent, as if there was no emotion in them. For a sage, all those who had not become a sage were nonentities. Even Luo Fan, who had obtained supreme authority and was omniscient and omnipotent in this world, was just a slightly bigger nonentity. The way she looked at Luo Fan now was her real state of mind. This was the look in her eyes. The power of a sage is indeed extraordinary. Luo Fan looked at the woman sage and sighed. Although he could be close to a sage in this world, the essential gap between him and a sage still made him much weaker than a sage, so he could not change the world naturally and respond to nature. Unless he took the initiative, he could not set off such a gorgeous and infinite vision as this woman sage's trip. The woman sage said lightly, "I didn't want to take your life. However, since you kidnapped the world to deal with me, I can't let you live." As she spoke, Luo Fan suddenly felt that the world had changed instantly. The whole world began to shake violently, as if something beyond the limits of the world had appeared in this world, making it impossible for the world to withstand it and almost beginning to collapse. "What have you done?" An anxious voice came into Luo Fan's ears. Then, a figure appeared out of thin air beside Luo Fan. This figure was, of course, the creator of this world, the Holy Venerable. However, at this moment, the Lord's expression was not as indifferent as it had always been. Instead, he looked a little panicked. Although to the outside world, he had only created this world for tens of thousands of years. However, one should not forget that the time dimension inside this world was completely different from the outside world. The tens of thousands of years in the outside world were almost billions of trillions of years for him. That was no less than the time he had spent cultivating in the outside world. After working so hard for this world for such a long time, one could imagine the depth of the Lord's feelings for this world. Now that he suddenly felt that this world was about to collapse and be destroyed, how could he not panic? Perhaps he is mad because of the woman sage. Luo Fan shrugged and said, "A woman is a woman. Even if she became a sage, she is still a woman. She always acts on her emotions." At this time, the Lord was no longer in the mood to care about Luo Fan. That was because he had already seen what it was that caused the entire world, to be unable to bear it. It was a handkerchief. A small light red handkerchief, only the size of 4 palms, slightly larger than the handkerchief used by ordinary people. When the handkerchief appeared in the woman sage's hand, it naturally gave off a supreme aura that shook the entire world. Even with the protection of the woman sage's aura, the world was still almost unable to withstand it and was about to collapse. This is the primordial origin spiritual treasure. Looking at the handkerchief, Luo Fan's heart was filled with lightning and thunder, and an indescribable fanaticism surged from the bottom of his heart. Back in the untainted world, with the help of the memory contained in Pangu's primordial spirit, he knew that magic treasures were divided into 4 levels: Immortal Treasure, Primordial Unity Treasure, Daluo Heavenly Treasure, and Primordial Origin Spiritual Treasure. However, from that time until now, he had lived for billions of years, and even walked through 2 perfect worlds and 1 great world. In this universe on Earth, he was able to travel up and down time, going back and forth between billions of trillions of years. However, all along, he had only seen the first 3 types of magic treasures. Strictly speaking, even the Sage-to-be and Pseudo-Sage treasures were only Daluo Heavenly treasures, just like the Sage-to-be realm and the Pseudo-Sage realm, strictly speaking, were also innate Daluo Heavenly treasures. As for the legendary Primordial Origin Spiritual Treasure, it was a Primordial Origin Spiritual Treasure that was on the same level as a Sage. However, the Will had only heard of it, but not seen it. Now, he actually saw a Primordial Origin Spiritual Treasure directly in front of him. The feeling of shock was really unparalleled. It made Luo Fan extremely excited. The handkerchief in front of him. On the surface, it looked so ordinary. It was so ordinary that it looked like an ordinary light red handkerchief. However, Luo Fan was omniscient in this world. The omniscient and omnipotent authority told him very clearly how extraordinary and mysterious this handkerchief was. The most direct manifestation of this was that the magic skills and the means that the woman sage used could be temporarily learned by this world by Luo Fan in an instant. However, this handkerchief had appeared for such a long time, but the world was still continuously integrating the mystery contained in its shape into Luo Fan's heart. From the beginning to the present, the information that the world had integrated into his heart was even enough to make the head of any level 9 pseudo-sage explode. Even the origin of life could not bear it and was destroyed. If it were not for the supreme authority that Luo Fan had, which made him almost omniscient and omnipotent in this world like a sage, the result would have been the same now. It was impossible for him to be as shocked as he was now. No. It's not a primordial origin spiritual treasure. At most, it's a fake primordial origin spiritual treasure. Suddenly, Luo Fan shook his head and sighed. It was not that he had discovered the flaws of this magic treasure, but that he had realized that this magic treasure was a magic treasure refined by the sage. Although its power was infinite, it could never surpass the essence of the woman sage. The woman sage herself was just a fake sage. The magic treasures that she refined were at most, and of course, they were only fake primordial origin spiritual treasures. If it were a real primordial origin spiritual treasure, why would the woman sage need to tangle with Luo Fan and the others? She could just hide in this magic treasure and rush into the state of chaos. If she was still indignant, it would be a trivial matter to destroy this world completely. However, although he knew this, it did not help the current situation. Whether it was a real primordial origin spiritual treasure or a fake primordial origin spiritual treasure, its power was strong enough to make Luo Fan and the holy sage despair. It did not make much difference which one it was. After the woman sage took out the handkerchief, she raised her hand, and the handkerchief instantly floated in the air. As it showed its power, the whole world shook violently again. There were even countless small cracks in every area of the world. Even the great way of the world became shaky at this time. Countless cracks covered every area of the great way. This situation had reached the limit. It was almost a sign that the world would be completely destroyed in the next moment. Stop! The holy sage yelled furiously, "Do you want to destroy this world?" As he spoke, he frantically sent out his power to strengthen the world, locking the great way of the world, so that the great way of the world could barely maintain itself. As long as the great way was not broken, It did not matter if everything else was broken. At least, it did not matter to the holy sage. He could completely restore it with a thought. However, it was different if the Great Way was broken. If the Great Way was broken, the foundation of the world would be completely destroyed. At that time, everything else in the world, including the rules and laws, time, space, matter, and energy, no matter how complete they were, would not be able to last long. In the end, they would go into chaos and destruction, or even disappear completely. At this time, the woman sage looked indifferent. She did not respond to the holy sage's yell at all. At this time, the handkerchief had already spread out and was covering Luo Fan. Seeing this, Luo Fan instantly understood. The sage is indeed unparalleled. However, the female saint had planned for the Lord so well. She knew very well that the Lord would not allow the world that he had created to be completely destroyed. At the moment when the world was about to collapse, he would definitely use some means to protect the world. He would definitely use his supernatural power to keep the world intact. Therefore, she was so unscrupulously using her magic treasure that was beyond the endurance limit of this world. The reason why she could use her magic treasure at will in this world, and could release her supernatural power at will without destroying the world. Although the nature of the magic treasure that she refined was not stronger than her, it could cause such a huge pressure to the world that it could not withstand. The reason was actually very simple. It was because her life was connected to this world. Just like how a person could not strangle himself to death with his own hands, since the woman sage's life was connected to this world, her instinct made her unable to completely release her power here. All her methods and supernatural power seemed to be infinite, but in fact, the power was limited by her own instinct. It allowed her own survival instinct to maintain all the power within the range that the world could bear. As for the magic treasure, it was different. This was because the spirituality of the magic treasure had been erased by the woman sage before it was born. Therefore, it did not have this kind of instinct. The explosion of its power was not limited at all. Once it was used, it would naturally go all out. It did not care whether the world could bear it or not. Therefore, that was why it was like this at this moment. The woman sage could attack at will in this world and exist in this world at will, but the magic treasure that she refined. This fake primordial spiritual treasure, on the contrary, once it was used, the world would collapse and the great Tao would be destroyed. Under the blessing of the authority of the world, Luo Fan's thinking had reached an unimaginable level. In the blink of an eye, he had already understood all these things. For a moment, he could not help but reveal an inexplicable bitter smile. Why bother? However, I am not the holy senior, so I don't really care what happens to the world. He said so. With a thought, all the power in this world, all the power, 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 all the power of destruction, in an instant completely condensed, directly blasting towards the handkerchief. No! The holy senior screamed in horror. If this force really collided with the handkerchief, there was not even a need to wait for all the power to explode. As long as they made contact, the fluctuations produced at the moment of contact would instantly destroy the entire world. It would make the world that the holy senior had painstakingly worked on for billions of trillions of years turn into countless pieces. Moreover, he might even have to pay with his life. At this moment, the holy senior suddenly had an indescribable regret in his heart. He regretted that he did not insist on his original plan and did not insist on filling up the seal of authority of Luo Fan. Instead, he directly gave Luo Fan the supreme authority of this world. Now, if the supreme authority of Luo Fan was not brought by the seal of authority, but was given by the holy senior, then he could instantly take away the authority of Luo Fan, so that Luo Fan would not be able to condense the power of the entire world to fight against the female saint. In that case, perhaps Luo Fan would fall into the hands of the female saint, and it might make the Holy Senior's efforts to invite him to help go to waste. However, at least the world would be saved. While the Holy Senior was regretting, Luo Fan was feeling lucky. Fortunately, he had insisted on it. Otherwise, the Holy Senior could take away his authority at any time and return him to his original state. At that time, if he did not have the determination and ability to completely destroy the world, he would have died a terrible death when facing the female saint. As for whether the Holy Senior would take away his authority at that time, was there a need to ask? Although Luo Fan had a good relationship with the Holy Senior, in order to protect the world and the last chance to become a saint, the Holy Senior would not hesitate even if the Holy Senior wanted to subdue him and directly give him to the female saint, let alone take away his authority. The serious and indifferent expression of the female saint finally changed. She immediately glanced at the Holy Senior, and there seemed to be a trace of doubt in her eyes. Obviously, she was wondering why the Holy Senior did not take away the supreme authority of Luo Fan. She was very clear about the sacrifices the Holy Senior had made for the world and the expectations he had placed on it. She did not believe that he would give up the world for Luo Fan. The speed of a saint's thinking would only be faster than that of Luo Fan. Almost without spending any time, she had already thought through the calculations that would take an ordinary cultivator hundreds of millions of years to figure out. She had even thought of countless possibilities for the current situation. Very soon, she made a decision. Chapter 1466. Obviously, the sage was not willing to perish together with Luo Fan. In the end, at the last moment, when the power that Luo Fan released was about to collide with the sage's magic weapon and produce a power that was enough to destroy the entire world, the sage stopped the impact and allowed the world to escape the disaster. Seeing this, Luo Fan smiled faintly and watched quietly. As the sage changed her approach, the entire world instantly changed. The feeling of being overwhelmed and about to collapse and be destroyed completely disappeared. The terrifying pressure that the great path exerted on the sacred venerables also disappeared in an instant. The tiny cracks that covered the endless space and time in the entire world were completely restored under the effect of the Great Way. In the blink of an eye, the scene of the end of the world had completely disappeared and was replaced by the original peace and vitality. Sensing this change, the Lord heaved a sigh of relief, and the anxious expression on his face relaxed a lot. After his expression relaxed, he sighed and said, "My friend, what you did this time was a little too much." Luo Fan smiled and said, "It was indeed a little too much. However, it worked very well, didn't it? Now, at least this sage can calm down and communicate with us seriously." The sage looked at Luo Fan indifferently and said, "If you can tell me what you know about the secret of becoming a sage, we will naturally be able to communicate peacefully. Otherwise, all the peace will only be temporary, and all the peace will just be on the surface." Hearing this, the Lord frowned. He turned around and said to Luo Fan, "My friend, do you know about the secret of becoming a sage?" Luo Fan smiled and said, "My friend, what are you talking about? We have discussed the way indirectly and directly countless times. Do you still think that I have any secrets to hide from you?" Hearing this, the Lord nodded and did not ask any more questions. As a powerful venerable who had walked 9 paths in a row and reached this stage, the Lord's confidence was naturally self-evident. That kind of super-confidence made him not have the slightest bit of doubt about his own judgment. He thought that he had already understood all of Luo Fan's secrets and knew all of Luo Fan's cultivation secret. Naturally, he wouldn't be suspicious just because of a few words from others, even if the person who spoke was a saint. It was no exception. The saint said indifferently, "I don't know what secrets you guys obtained during the Tao discussion, but I have my own judgment. He must be hiding something. He must know some key to becoming a saint. Otherwise, even if I absorb the power of the great tribulation of heaven and earth, I will not be able to become a saint. I can only perish along with this world." Luo Fan laughed and said, Is there still a need to know any secrets about this? Wouldn't we know as long as we deduce it logically? Hearing this, not only did the Lord's expression change, but the indifference in the saint's eyes also dissipated a lot and was replaced with an inexplicable doubt. Luo Fan did not wait for them to say anything. Instead, he continued to state his own judgment. Of course, although this was not the core of his judgment, it was still a reasonable judgment. I came from a world with a real sage. I think you should know about this, Holy Senior. Speaking of this, the Holy Senior nodded. Obviously, Luo Fan did not hide his origin in the Devil Realm. Although he did not directly tell the Lord, since there were traces of it, he naturally could not hide it from the Lord. In that world, there are 7 real saints who are completely unrestrained by the shackles of heaven and earth. 7 true saints. However, although they have taken in countless disciples over the years and wanted to train another real saint, in the end, they could not do it. Until now, after countless years, there are still only 7 saints in that world. What do you guys think this means? Hearing this, both the Lord and the saint's facial expression changed slightly. It could not be more obvious what this meant. This clearly meant that the difficulty of becoming a saint was countless times more difficult than they had imagined. At this moment, both the Lord and the female saint were very clear about what kind of existence a saint was. This female saint could think of absorbing the power of the catastrophe of heaven and earth to make herself real in such a short period of time. Could it be that the true saints had not thought of this after so many years? Since they must have thought of this, why did they not train another saint after so many years? Obviously, there was only one possibility, which was that this path could not be taken. Indeed, it's just a simple deduction. The Lord sighed. Suddenly, he felt that he had lost all his motivation. According to this deduction, perhaps the method he was using now might not be effective, and it was impossible for him to become a real saint. The female saint was disappointed at first, but she quickly recovered and said, "Although it seems to make sense, there is a huge problem." The Lord's eyes lit up and he asked, "What problem?" He was more concerned about Luo Fan's answer than the female saint. Although the problem that the female saint encountered seemed different from the problem that he had encountered, it was essentially the same. If the woman sage's method of absorbing the power of the tribulation of heaven and earth was unsuccessful, didn't it mean that his method of cultivating this world into a perfect world and the power of the great heaven and earth in order to obtain unlimited time and become a sage leisurely was also impossible to succeed? After all, with the protection of a real saint, who did not have unlimited time. Luo Fan said, "Please go ahead." The female saint said, "How do you know that there are only 7 real saints in that world? You must have been quite weak in that world. With your weakness, how could you be sure that there were only 7 saints in that world and not more? Moreover, even if you were sure that there were only 7 saints in that world, did it mean that the 7 saints did not train more saints? Why couldn't the saints that were trained by the 7 saints recreate the world in the chaos? Recreate the world and leave this world, so you don't know about it?" Hearing this question, Luo Fan laughed and said, "Even though I am not a saint, I know how insignificant any world is to a saint. If they really succeeded in training a real saint, why would the 7 saints care so much about this perfect world? It is even more impossible to say that the real saints that they trained left this world and did not show up in this world. There is no love without a reason in this world. Those true saints trained other saints. Naturally, they would not have no desire. Why would they let them recreate the world in other places and completely ignore the things that happened in this world?" Following Luo Fan's words, the Lord and the female saints' faces became quite unpleasant. "Of course, this is just my guess. Perhaps the truth is just like what you said. Maybe. After all, only the saints can know about the things that happened between the saints. The others who are not saints are just speculations. It is just a guess, and its credibility is questionable. The saints can judge for themselves," Luo Fan said. The female saint's expression did not change because of Luo Fan's words. It was still the same as before, looking a little unpleasant. Although this female saint was only a fake saint who could only be a saint in this world, she was still a saint after all. He could not be more clear about the mentality of a saint. Saints were called saints, but they were not the kind of saints who were moral. They were not the kind of people who only cared about giving and not taking. There was only one reason why a saint would work hard to train other saints, and that was to let those new saints bring benefits to themselves. Perhaps it was to let those new saints join their side to compete with other saints and seize cultivation resources. Perhaps it was to let the new saints help them build a world that could exist for a long time and support their cultivation. This was actually similar to the intention of ordinary cultivators to recruit disciples. It was completely impossible for such a saint to completely leave this world and not participate in any affairs in this world. Based on this deduction, it was obvious that what she said when she refuted Luo Fan earlier was not true at all. She turned around and took a step forward. The female saint disappeared in front of Luo Fan and the Lord. She returned to the strange state of chaos that she had been living in. Seeing that she had left, Luo Fan smiled at the Lord and said, "It seems that the matter has been resolved." The Lord smiled bitterly and said, "I would rather it not be resolved like this. What you said just now not only made the female saint give up her previous plan, but it also made me lose the confidence to continue moving forward." Luo Fan smiled and said, "Why do you say that? You opened up this world and cultivated it into a perfect world. The fundamental purpose of cultivating it into a world is not to become a saint in the process, but to obtain eternal time for cultivation. The current situation does not have much impact on the fundamental goal. The fundamental goal is indeed this, but to understand the mystery of the creation of the world through the process and to seek the possibility of becoming a saint is not far from the fundamental goal. However, it occupies more than half of all the goals. Now, what you've said has already eliminated the other half of the goal," the Holy Venerable said with a bitter expression. Luo Fan only smiled and did not say anything more. Since the Lord had said all these, it obviously meant that he had thought it through. If that was the case, why should he say anything more? The Lord sighed for a long time and then said, "This time, I have to thank you, my friend. If it wasn't for you, I'm afraid that my previous efforts of billions of years would have been in vain. Didn't you invite me here for this? Why do you need to thank me?" Luo Fan smiled. The Lord laughed and said, "It seems that it was me who invited you here this time. It was the most correct decision." Hearing this, Luo Fan only smiled. Although the matter had been solved, Luo Fan did not want to leave this world, and the Lord did not ask Luo Fan to leave either. The seventh apocalypse of heaven and earth was the most important apocalypse of heaven and earth. If this apocalypse of heaven and earth was successfully passed, this world would truly break away from the Earth's universe and step into a state of chaos. It would become a truly perfect world and would no longer be shackled by the Earth's universe. Of course, it would no longer be protected by the Earth's universe. This process of change almost contained the deepest mystery of the universe and even the secrets of the saint. If one missed this opportunity, one would not have another one. How could Luo Fan miss it? This was actually the reward the Lord gave to Luo Fan. Of course, the Lord knew this very well. Naturally, he would not let Luo Fan leave at this time. In the next millions of years, Luo Fan and the Holy Senior were discussing Tao in this world. They constantly exchanged their experiences during this period of time. Both of them were constantly creating a perfect world and trying to let the world survive the apocalypse of heaven and earth. Compared to the last time they talked about Tao, their understanding of the way to create the world, they had made great progress. Compared to the past, all of them had undergone earth-shattering improvements. This was good. They had the foundation and necessity to talk about Tao again. After thousands of years, both Luo Fan and the Lord felt that they had gained a lot. Faintly, they both felt that the power of their supernatural powers was much stronger than before. During these thousands of years, the woman saint. But there was no movement at all. It was as if such a saint did not exist in this world, and had always been holed up in that strange state of chaos. No one knew what she was planning, or if she had completely lost interest in the evolution of this world. Since a saint could be born in this world, the prosperity of the cultivation civilization had almost reached its peak. In the entire world, there were countless pseudo-saint existences. There were also many pseudo-saint, level 9 pseudo-saint, and supreme venerables. Although its overall scale was far inferior to the devil world and even the central origin world, it already possessed some of the majesty of the devil world and possessed a boundless aura. In the tens of millions of years that Luo Fan was here, there were hundreds of ninth-grade pseudo-saints who attempted to break through to the saint realm, creating more than a dozen supreme venerables. Hundreds of ninth-grade pseudo-saints attempted to break through to the saint realm. Naturally, not all of them survived. Aside from those who obtained the Holy Will and became supreme venerables, the other ninth-grade pseudo-saints who failed to break through to the saint realm died and their souls scattered. This was because this world and the outside world were wrapped in a layer of gray that was extremely close to the state of chaos, completely isolating this world from the outside world. Therefore, although there were so many supreme venerables, pseudo-saint level 9 pseudo-saint, and even more pseudo-saint cultivators in this world, none of them could leave this world. To them, this world was actually the same as the Earth universe, which was the only existence in the state of chaos. All of their battles, schemes, and expansion could only be done in this world. As a result, because of their efforts, there were countless great kiliacosms, medium kiliacosms, and minor kiliacosms. This made this world gradually have some characteristics of the Earth universe, and it became composed of countless worlds and spacetimes. This caused the foundation of the world to become more and more profound. At the same time, it also made the upcoming calamity of the world even more difficult to grasp and control, even more difficult to make use of. As the creator of this world, the sacred venerable had a very clear sense of the world calamity. He had already vaguely sensed when the great tribulation of heaven and earth would arrive, when he had survived the sixth tribulation of heaven and earth. As the time of the great tribulation of the heavens and earth drew closer and closer, this feeling became clearer and clearer. On this day, the sacred venerable and Luo Fan ended their discussion. He sighed and said, "It seems that the seventh world calamity is coming. Fellow cultivator, haven't you been waiting for billions of years?" Luo Fan smiled. The Lord sighed and said, "This time's tribulation of heaven and earth will be the most difficult one. If you are not careful, you will be doomed eternally." I can't help but sigh. However, after passing through this world calamity, you will not be a saint, but a saint. With such a huge gain, even if it is a little difficult, it is still acceptable. Luo Fan smiled. Not being a saint was what Luo Fan had concluded. It was the state that the sacred venerable would be in after this world became perfect. The sacred venerable was the creator of this world. He had absolute and supreme authority in this world. Even if he was not a saint, he would be omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipotent. Even if a real saint was born in that world, he would not be able to do anything. He could only be equal to the saint and not hurt him. In this state, he would not be a saint among saints. Naturally, he would not be a saint. However, such a state was still a little dangerous when the world was still a perfect world. A perfect world was different from a great world. It could not be destroyed by a saint. If a real saint was born in this world at this stage, and the real saint was willing to destroy the world to kill him, there was still a possibility that he would die. Only when the world was truly upgraded to a perfect world, to a level that even a real saint could not destroy. The sacred venerable. Only then could he be considered to be truly eternal and indestructible. Only then would there be no possibility of death. From this point of view, after passing through the seventh world calamity, before the ninth great tribulation of heaven and earth was over, for the sacred venerable, it was the most dangerous moment. Both Luo Fan and the sacred venerable were very clear about this. However, neither of them said such words that spoiled the mood. The sacred venerable smiled and said, "Not a saint, but a saint. This conclusion is really accurate." With a smile, the sacred venerable changed the topic and said, "I want to go and see the saint. Are you willing to go with me?" Luo Fan smiled and nodded. Then, both of them stood up at the same time. With a single thought, they had already crossed a distance of countless light years and directly arrived at the place that only the two of them and the female saint could find. There was a strange state that was similar to the state of chaos in this world. This state was the state of chaos in this world. All the creatures and all the cultivators in this world, unless they could see the origin directly like Luo Fan and the sacred venerable, would never be able to find this place. Even the cultivators who could sense the chaotic state couldn't tell the difference between this place and the strange state outside the heaven and earth. They could only feel that this was the chaotic state, the chaos outside the heaven and earth. They would never think that there was a supreme and indestructible saint here. The indestructible saint was among them. Luo Fan and the sacred venerable stood outside this strange state and quietly looked at the large gray and strange existence in front of them. "Since you are here, why don't you come in?" The female saint's voice was heard from the strange state at this time. The voice was calm and indifferent, but it contained traces of the mystery that belonged to the way of the saint. Luo Fan and the sacred venerable looked at each other and smiled. Without hesitation, they stepped into the gray and misty place. "I think that you should make your cave residence like this." Feeling the inexplicable comfort, Luo Fan could not help but say to the sacred venerable, "After all, this world is not perfect. Everything that is built here in this kind of chaos will be connected together, which is a little inconvenient." The sacred venerable seemed to feel quite comfortable and sighed. "As long as you get through this disaster, this kind of disadvantage will not happen again. By then, you can build thousands of such states, and no one will care about you." At this time, the voice of the female saint came into their ears. Then, the figure of the female saint appeared in front of them. It was still the same as before. Her body looked normal, but if one took a closer look, they could see that countless worlds were being born and destroyed quickly. It seemed that there was no difference from before. Even so, if the saint is not willing to let go, I'm afraid that this disaster will not be so easy to get through. I wonder if the saint is willing to let go? The sacred venerable looked at the female saint and smiled. If this world became perfect, then this strange state that was similar to the state of chaos would no longer be the state of chaos of this world. By then, building this kind of strange state that was similar to the state of chaos would be like building a strange world. With the rules of heaven and earth to separate them, they would naturally not be connected together. The situation in front of them that was similar to the state of chaos would be connected in any place between heaven and earth. Of course, it would not happen again. Hearing the sacred venerable's words, the female saint glanced at Luo Fan and said, "Even if I want to do it, this friend will stop me. It will be difficult to succeed. Founder, why are you worried?" Hearing this, the sacred venerable knew that she really did not want to do it and was finally completely relieved.